Terminal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger roll, Atlantic.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down SC off. Bring in SC off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.
Oh, good morning. Looks like we're in Boca Chica again, or Starbase as Elon likes to call it. We've got a tower section lift happening as it speaks, and of course it happens really first thing in the morning. Of course, Mary's not going to miss it. Mary's out there, as always, back now from a vacation, well-deserved vacation, and we've got our bots as well, so we're going to watch this tower section being lifted. And of course, it's always an ever-interesting situation at Starbase. This orbital tower keeps growing. This will host Super Heavy. This is the big rocket that's going to host Starship and do this orbital attempt in the next month or so. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We do know that July was now too optimistic to say the least, but heck, anytime this summer, that'll be some achievement. So, we're going to watch this lift. We'll take some questions, and if you at NASA Spaceflight in chat, we'll try our best to answer the questions. I think it's just mainly me this morning so far, so don't ask too hard a question, please, because you might embarrass me. We don't do that, do we? No, we don't. So, we're now going to watch this tower section, and hopefully they will lift it with no short period of time, because we've seen on previous tower section lists what we can expect from this. They unbolt it from the stand and then lift it on this big, massive crane that the SpaceXers like to call Franken crane. I even know choked on my own tea there. But yeah, this massive crane really is impressive. We remember when Tankzilla first arrived there at the scene, we all thought that's the biggest crane we've ever seen in our lives. And then suddenly the cranes get bigger and bigger. And this huge monster now is doing a dawn lift. So this really will be something quite interesting. But let's just see. We can take some questions first. Let's see if our panel's updating. And if Michael can tell if that's working or not. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to read them out of the chat straight away, because I can see most of the questions have been asking about that little spat on Twitter last night between Tori and Elon. That's unfortunate, isn't it? I thought Tori was very classy, as always, with his replies. He knows what he's doing, Tori. He knows he's not going to get into a Twitter fight. And the situation there is quite interesting, because I remember when we first started covering SpaceX, which was really right at the start, the first days, we started as a shuttle site. And one of the first non-shuttle things we covered was Elon Musk asking us if he wanted to interview him about SpaceX. And that was something which we knew about Elon and PayPal, we knew about who he was. But it was one of those startups where it's not like today where they've got Astra and we've got Relativity Space and all these companies starting up where you expect new companies to start up. Back then it was quite a new thing. It was either shuttle or it was like Lockheed Martin and Boeing, or people like that, or Sea Launch, which was still Boeing. So these were big companies. So when someone comes across and wants to start his own record company, we all thought, well, this is interesting, this is different, this is quite unique. And literally within the first throes of SpaceX, there was a lawsuit from Boeing and Lockheed Martin. So you can see where Elon's got this dislike of that kind of lobbyist industry, where they take a dislike to these new companies starting up. So I think now SpaceX is successful, he still has that in the back of his mind. And of course, although Tori's ULA and wasn't at the company when this all happened, when he sees things about ULA being, kind of like happy about Vulcan and things like that, he brings in these tweets like, where's your engines? Has Jeff sent your engines yet? And things like that. And of course, these government contracts, they all come in. So I understand both sides of the story. I understand Elon getting rattled by them, and I can understand Tori sort of like, well, no, we're quite happy where we are. We're not too upset about that. So that's one of the things I think that's where the thing has come from. I really do. So yeah, it's just one of those things. I would not take it too seriously that they're loggerheads or anything like that, so I won't worry too much. As far as the future goes, that's the interesting thing. Vulcan is pretty much on track, but they are waiting for those engines. It's a joke now, Jeff wears the engines, but it's a true story. Blue Origin need to find a way to get these BE4s on a test stand at Redstone, I believe it is, which is where they'll do the core firings and things like that, as well as West Texas, where they've got like a McGregor-style test stand, and send them to ULA, because Vulcan cannot launch without engines, and neither can New Glenn. So that's something where SpaceX has got a massive advantage over these companies, because they have got Raptors built, being tested, and now flown. And that's something else. So that's why they can now progress this orbital attempt, which will be hosted at this Super Heavy orbital launch site, which is where the tower is right now. So I was trying to segue back into the tower there, you might have noticed. This is something where the infrastructure is literally the thing they're waiting for now. They've got the vehicles. They've got Super Heavy Booster 3 in the high bay. They've got Booster 4 ready to be stacked next, which is the orbital booster. That's the one that's going to orbit. So Booster 3 in the high bay will initially go out to the suborbital pad, I believe. That's why they can roll that out pretty much this week if they need to. And that will be hosted at the place where we saw SN5, SN6, and up to SN, 15. So it's something where they can continue working on the orbital launch site. There's a Super Heavy booster as it is. That is now officially called Booster 3. Because when Elon tweeted Booster 2, and we were told by the SpaceX it's Booster 3, of course people are going to say, well, hang on a minute, why are we going to believe you over Elon Musk? And you can understand that. But, it was simply either a mistype on his account, or they have all realigned to what they are calling them, because it was BN3 sections involved here. And they just renamed them to Booster 3, Booster 4, Ship 20, which is what the actual Starship they're building next will be called. So that's where we stand with that. Let's see if we have any questions in this queue which I can take from. Why is it called Frankencrane? The reason why it's called that is literally because the SpaceX's took the real name of it, which is an LR111, so lots of numbers. I can't remember off the top of my head. We're all working on nicknames now, aren't we? And it's from different parts of different booms. So they've literally put this, that's why it's got different colours on its boom. So they nicknamed it Frankencrane from the movie, and from the book. So that's why they call it that. Appreciate all the thanks, by the way. Jordan, thank you to you, Mike, and to Taylor. All very much appreciated. And let's see here, we've got Jay Blaze. How many Raptors will Booster 3 static fire with? Do we know if they're going to static fire it or not? That's the question. As far as I'm concerned, I think the main task of this ground testing will be to put it through proof testing and a cryo test possibly, because the other issue is that the orbital launch site has got a lot more GSE, which is ground support equipment, which allows for the fueling of a very thirsty booster, which will be Booster 4, which will be the one which will be taken to an orbital attempt. Suborbital site is used to filling the Starship's tanks. So whether or not they can do a static fire by just partially filling the tanks on this Booster 3, again, I don't want to speculate too much, but as far as I'm concerned, I think the main test will be for cryoproofing the actual tankage of a Super Heavy. A static fire, I think they'll get more use static firing the actual vehicle they're going to launch, which will be Booster 4. Again, we'll have to wait and see. As far as I know, I don't think there's any Raptors on the Booster 3 in high bay right now. We've not seen any that I know of. And by the way, the name of the crane, Frankencrane, the real name, thank you, Jack, is LR11350. That's the real name. We do prefer when we write articles to name the cranes their real name, because the nicknames can get a bit silly, especially when different communities have different names for them as well. But the Frankencrane one is what we're sticking with, because that's what the SpaceX has named it. I think that's more important than what we name it. So that's why we're going with that one.
Chris, I'd talk more, but my voice is trash.
Whoa! And there's Jack. And poor Jack would be normally taking over for my silly voice, but unfortunately, Jack has done so much commentary recently, his voice is gone.
I'm in pain.
And Michael's in pain. So
My ears.
we can
Sorry.
That's a funny thing. It's almost like an advertisement. Do you have anyone else here who likes to commentate? Because if you do, we might give you a trial. But it really is. There's so much going on. It's not just Starship. It's all, we had all the events yesterday with the Falcon 9 launch, which was fantastic, wasn't it? Because it was a land landing LZ1, which is always something stunning to watch. But there's so much going on that we do need to rotate our commentators, otherwise we're going to just lose voices left, right, and centre.
Well,
But I
Chris,
do believe Thomas is on later, so Thomas fan club can be looking forward to his smooth tones in the not too distant future.
we did see them just before we went live. They flipped the crane around with the tower sections obviously suspended on it, and they then lowered it down a bit. So typically we've seen, according to Mary, they hook some tooling up before they lift it, so that's why they lower it down. In the past, that process has taken anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes. So we're in that process right now, and once that process is done, we will obviously expect them to begin to lift up to the very top of the tower. We are also having our eyes on the production site. There are sheriff deputies all over the place. DOS just drove by and said half the road is already closed. Elon tweeted that the Super Heavy rollout is scheduled for tomorrow a couple of hours ago, but we're not sure if he had actually gone to bed yet. So if we do see some action happening at the production site, we obviously have our cameras on, and we'll cut over to that if something exciting happens.
And as you finish that, Robert Hobson, my word, a regular supporter with $99, $99.99 in fact, let's call it $100. Chris, if the tower can be measured in horses, how high will it eventually be? Well, we measure horses in hands, so let someone find out a way of measuring the full height of the tower in normal metric or imperial units and then convert it into horse hands, and then we'll find our answer by dividing it by the average hands of a horse, which is about 15 and 16. So yeah, thank you for that, Robert, because I do believe you're playing on my well-known love of horses, which is a long story and not as silly as it may sound. There's actually a really good reason for that. So thank you very much for your support and for spending $100 just to make me do a horse joke. Much appreciated. Colin Gregg, what do you think of Elon's tweets overnight? Oh, that's another one about Elon's tweets. Again, I find it interesting because there's no way without Twitter, there's no way we'd see something like this. It's not like the thing I tweeted the other day, which was a picture of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs during that interview together, which was quite a really interesting interview if you see it on YouTube, where they're discussing their different kind of business practices and approaches. You could imagine a kind of like a conference style interview between Elon and Tory on TV or web stream, which would be similar to that, which would be their different approaches. But it wouldn't be the same as Twitter, because Twitter is kind of like where you say anything sometimes, or some people do at least, as we've all noticed. And I don't think it would be that harsh between Tory and Elon. I think we've seen with Gwen Shotwell and Tory at congressional hearings and Senate hearings where they're talking about contracts and things like that, that it's a lot more on point with each other's business cases rather than the other person's business cases. When Elon's done the occasional one, he's mentioned about success and failure of Atlas V, and he was saying that the CRS mission, which had a kind of like a lower orbit because it lost an engine during ascent, would be classed as a success in ULA's way of saying success, because they had also the performance issues with a few of Atlas, with I think 2 Atlas V launches, and they've classed it as a 100% successful vehicle. So there's lots of like ways you can play around with this, where you can see where Elon, in the back of his mind, when he's tweeting towards questions directed at ULA, that he has to fight his case, and where Tory Bruno replies in his very classy and always classy way of backing his case rather than saying anything bad about SpaceX. It's quite a clever, different clash of personalities there. So I think that's how I see it. How it means in the overall sense of things is these are competitors. I tend to get quite irritated by people who say Team Space, apart from the ones who mean it. I know Tim says it a lot, Tim Dodd says it a lot, and he means it, and that's good, but a lot of people sometimes say it and hijack it as a way of saying anyone but Elon. I've noticed that quite a lot, especially SLS fans. They will try and tag things as Team Space, but trust me, they are not Team Space. They are anyone but Elon, anyone but SpaceX. And that's where you've got to be careful about these things, because it tends to be very much correct to say these companies are competitors. They don't walk around Congress with their lobbyists holding hands saying, we can all have contracts, everybody can be happy. They are fighting for business. They are looking to be competitors in space. They can respect each other, which I hope they all do, and I'm sure they all do in some way at least. But when it comes down to it, there's a lot of space companies fighting for contracts to launch payloads into space on their rockets. So that element of friendly competition is the best we can hope for, but it's still competition. It's very important to understand that. So without me going on too much, let's see if we've got any other questions. Do we have any clue of what crane on top of the tower will look like? That's a very good question, actually, because all we've seen so far are sections. We've not seen what would be a crane that would be used to lift a Starship on top of a super heavy booster on the orbital launch site tower. That is going to be very interesting. Also, the grabby hands, which Elon described as mechanical arms, which will be used to eventually, not straight away, but eventually, grab the booster as it returns for landing and place it back on the mount. That's going to blur quite a few minds, mine included, because this tower, as we see it right now, is literally like a fixed service structure. As you can see, let's take 39A. We all know what 39A looks like. Well, I'm sure most of us doing it. There's only about 3,000 people in it, and most of them will be hardcore space fans because they're clicking on a link about a launch tower. So they will know their launch sites. 39A's fixed service structure, as it exists now, taking away all the shuttle infrastructure like the rotating service structure, is just a tower. It is literally just like what we're looking at now in this view. It's a tower, but it's been cladded. It's got an elevator inside, and there's a crew access arm now attached to it, which leads to the Crew Dragon capsule. This is where it stands right now. What they're going to add on top, we believe, is literally some kind of crane, which will be used to lift Starship lift a super heavy booster onto the mount, and then lift the Starship onto the mount. And then during its active campaigns, that'll be quite a fast process because boosters will be landing, Starships will be landing, and then they'll integrate them back on together onto the launch mount via that crane on top of the tower. How that crane will look, I don't know because we've not seen it, but we may see it very soon because they're now coming to the end of the static process with the tower sections. The next thing we'll see after that are the arms, which will go onto the side of the tower, and they will be mechanical arms, which we've only seen in handmade renders, which are amazing, by the way. Probably SpaceX don't need to put out any kind of like videos because the community on Twitter and on YouTube who create videos which perceive what they believe will be the look of the grabby arms, shall we call them? Let's call them grabby arms for now, are amazing, and they do kind of give you an impression of what kind of amazing things we'll see when these boosters return. So hopefully we'll have to just wait. I can't answer the question because I don't know, but it's something to look forward to. So let's just wait and see if Mary sees a big massive amount of lorries arriving with crane parts in the not too distant future. Another question here: will the 8th section be lifted on the crane on this crane configuration? See, this final section is, I believe, is 8, but I don't think that'll include the crane. The crane will be added on top of that, I believe. So we're expecting, I think, section 8, if I'm not too mistaken, to be a slightly different kind of looking section than this one has been lifted now. This is section 7 being lifted right now. That's the one that will go on top of the tower as we see it, and there's one more section to go. I don't think that will be a crane itself. That will be just a section which will then have a crane on top. That's as far as I can see it being done. Connor, do you think the booster will be rolled today? Well, we don't. We've answered it earlier. So far, it's looking like it will because of the activity down there. So hopefully, it'll be something that will allow for the event to happen, because Elon's tweet, he tends to say today or tomorrow based on where he is at the time. And when he tweeted was about an hour ago, which would be today in any part of the any part of the States. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We'll keep a very close eye on it, and if it happens, we'll go live. Trust me. A lot of people asking about rollouts. Sam Ford, favorite brand of tea? Well, you know it's gonna be Yorkshire tea. I can answer that straight away. Sinatra, which shuttle best shuttle? Atlantis is the best shuttle. The reason why I say that is because a lot of people say their best shuttle is their favorite shuttle, and the favorite shuttle is their first shuttle experience. I recall a lot of the favorite first launches I watched on the internet, would you believe, were back in the days of, we complain about NASA TV being 720 still, but trust me, back in the day of the early days of the internet, NASA TV was like revolutionary. We were watching on things like Real Media. People who are old enough to remember, there was no Windows Media or anything like that, no YouTube or anything like that. It was little players called Real Player videos. They were terrible things, really, but they worked, and we all got to see our first webcasts via it. It was an amazing thing where your computer could watch a launch live, and it just came around the time of the first was Atlantis, and I think everyone just got into it thinking we can now watch launches live on the internet, and I think a lot of people became attached with the orbiter that was involved with that first launch on the internet, which was Atlantis. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of people say Atlantis. But I'm a big fan of her missions going to a Mir. Atlantis was the main orbiter doing the Mir missions back in the day, and it really was a fascinating thing to watch there, because especially in the climate at the time, it was quite naughty politically, shall we say. And just an American shuttle with a big American flag on the side arriving at this big Russian space station was just something surreal. It was like a modern day version of the Apollo Soyuz test program. And as far as Mary's concerned in the back room, she's saying they are moving it today. So we are expecting a Super Heavy Booster 3 rollout, which we've all said would be a fascinating thing to watch. We've always said that watching a Starship roll down Highway 4 has been something that's always found hilarious and fascinating at the same time. To see this huge tall Super Heavy Booster 3 rolling down Highway 4, that is going to be a surreal sight to see, because this is a tall vehicle. There we are on the right hand side. That is going to go on a road trip down Highway 4. I personally just hope the road is level, because that is something that they're going to have to keep very, very stable and very slowly rolled out as they take it around that corner, which we all see, where you see it come around the corner of the propellant farm, the tank farm of the suborbital site. That's quite a bend. This is no straight runway kind of a road. So that's going to be something which will be a first-time operation. It'll be a Pathfinder operation, by the way. It's the first time they've done it, so they call it Pathfinder operations. It was said to be that BM1, as they called it, which is probably now called Booster 1 in the old history. That was meant to happen, but they ended up scrapping that. And then, of course, BN2 is BN 2.1, which is the test tank, which they've tested. So the first Super Heavy, stacked Super Heavy that will roll out of the high bay and down to the launch site is this one on the right-hand side, Booster 3. That's what we're all calling it, and that's what Elon's calling it, and that's why I'm taking this next question, because it asks, are grid fins going to be attached on BN 2.3? It's not 2 or 3 anymore, it's now Booster 3. We have seen in the sections they are building for the Super Heavies these 4 ports, which we believe are for grid fins. We also saw in a video from Mary, it was at least over a month ago, probably about 6-7 weeks ago, of grid fins arriving. That was the first time we saw grid fins in Starbase. So that was the amazing catch by Mary, where these huge grid fins, I mean, they're big on Falcon 9 as it is. So I don't think they're massively bigger for Super Heavy, but they are still very large. So they are in the base, so they could technically... Go on, Michael.
I think Elon said on Twitter that 4 will get grid fins and 3 will not.
So that makes sense. So they can do this, because obviously Booster 3 is ground testing, so they're not going to launch it. you don't need grid fins. You can do ground testing. So that's an obvious thing. So 4 will get them. So there we go. We will see grid fins on 4 to answer the question on that one. And I do believe as soon as Super Heavy Booster 3 leaves the high bay, I think they'll go straight into stacking operations with Booster 4. They'll start putting sections in the high bay. So this is going to be an exciting thing where we can watch the orbital rocket, which we know be the orbital attempt rocket, being stacked in the high bay as Booster 3 is being tested, ground tested, at the suborbital launch site. So that'll be another first with Booster 4. Booster 4 will be the first one to go to the orbital launch site, which is next door where they're building this tower. So, Ron Smith, another regular. Do you think Highway 4 will survive Super Heavy rollout intact? Crawlerway had to replace rocks every time shuttle rolled out. Well, yeah, but the reason why the Crawlerway had to have its so much work. I mean, when a shuttle stack rolled out, it was so heavy. You had the crawler transporter, you had the mobile launch platform, and then you had the solid rocket boosters fueled on the stack with the external tank and shuttle. The external tank wasn't fueled, obviously, but the weight of the super heavy, the weight of the solid rocket boosters really added a lot to it, not least the mobile launch platform, not least the crawler transporter. It's a lot less weight involved than the Crawlerway at Kennedy Space Center has to endure. And they've actually upgraded it since, because with SLS, it's even heavier. So they've had to spend several years redoing the Crawlerway. And in fact, they also had a water tanker roll out before the actual crawler, because they had to spray the Crawlerway as the crawler was was moving down it because of dust. The actual rocks would kick up dust and would get into the greasy parts of the crawler transporter and risk clogging things up. So they had to literally water spray the crawler transporter, the Crawlerway, for the crawler transporter to roll along. Much different case with Highway 4. Highway 4, it's got that SMPTP. I keep pronouncing the initials the wrong way around, but they will roll it out quite light compared to a shuttle stack. It's an unfueled amount of steel rings, so it's not too drastic. I think the biggest challenge is the height of it. Speaking of height,
it's going up, Chris. Look at that.
Hey, I was just going to say, I was trying to segue into it. The tower section is now rising. So I think I need to do a little screen cap of this. I must tell you, I am on a laptop in a little cupboard room in Leeds where I'm working. I have employees staring through the window at me, trying to put me off, which I will deal with when I get off. Trust me, because I am one of their bosses. So I'm going to take a quick screen cap of this. I will, in fact, tell you what, everybody in this chat, I'm going to put a tweet out. Sometimes I do this, where if I put a tweet out, I'll link it into the chat room, and you can all RT it, and we can all say, look at all these people so interested in it, because you're already here, but we can get more people involved, can't we? So if I can talk and multitask, which most men can't do, and I can't, one of those, I will going to do this tweet saying the tower section is on the rise. There we go. You're going to get a live tweet process here. The tower, the section 7, Michael, isn't it?
Yep, section 7.
You can hear me typing, would you believe? Section 7 of the orbital launch.
And of course, section 7 is the final full section. Section 8 is a slightly smaller section. So the tower will be about 7 sections tall and 2/3 approximately.
Thank you, Michael, for taking that for a second to give me a chance to type at the same time as doing that. I'm going to tweet that out. 670 orbital is on the rise. Live with a screen cap. There we go. Yeah, you'll enjoy that. All of you got to enjoy what I do most of the day, which is tweet. Because normally we've got people like Jack and Thomas and Chris G, and people with much finer voices, much more interesting answers to questions than I am. There's a tweet, everybody. If you want to hit a like on that tweet, it'd be much appreciated. It sounds quite desperate, doesn't it? I'm kind of regretting doing it now, but the main thing is to get more people aware there is a lift happening right now. And let's see if we've got any more questions before I go on about Twitter too much. I tell you what, lots of people are asking about rollout of Super Heavy. Trust me, we're keeping an eye on it. In fact, we've got a split screen, a wonderful split screen where it's actually 2/3 in the tower, 1/3 on Super Heavy, which I find quite interesting. We will hopefully keep a very close eye on that and be ready to hit the live button as soon as any of the movement happens. So
I mean, we're already
don't
live,
worry about
Chris,
that.
so
Yeah, but I think it's just better than saying we are live. We will be covering it if anything happens, because a lot of people are asking, will you be live for it? Will you cover it? Oh, yes, of course we'll cover it. Don't worry about that.
and the road closure for the rollout is from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. So it might be the type of thing where the Super Heavy takes a lot longer to roll out than a Starship.
Yeah, most of the questions, in fact, are asking the same question about that. A question about the crane here, because the last section after this, we think they've got have they got the clearance? We'll have to do another extension on the boom. I am no crane expert, but certainly will we see this lifted to its maximum height? It looks like there's enough room now. The way they've configured the crane to complete the process. But obviously they've thought in advance of this, where the full height of the tower can be hoisted in sections by the full height of this crane. So I don't think that's a question of whether think, we need a bigger crane again. This final section is too big. I don't think we'll get to that situation at all. So that's something where. Also, I want to point out, on the left-hand side of the tower is the mount. That mount has yet to receive its table. We've seen that table being constructed in Mary's videos for months now, down at the production site. That circular kind of like, almost like an octagon kind of shape. I don't know how many sections it is, but it's literally the launch table that will be put on top of that launch mount we see on the left-hand side of the tower right now. So there's still some work to do. Even if this tower's completed, they're still going to put the launch table on. They're still going to do more
Really quick,
GSC.
Chris, sorry to jump in. On the right, on the right of the left-hand screen, you can see the yellow crane is moving to the right. So it looks like they are preparing for a super heavy lift as soon as the
Oh
booster
my
reaches
goodness.
the launch site. Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
No, you're fine to mention that, because this is going to be an interesting day, isn't it, guys? Let's face it. It's going to be an interesting day. They're going to literally finish stacking this section, and we might see look at that. There's the other crane heading out. So we may be, for our first ever super heavy booster, arriving at the launch site. Ground
World's,
testing, yes, but it'd be interesting enough. Trust me.
world's tallest green silo.
Taking Texas tank watching to the extreme. Speaking of which, we've got a stove, you know. In fact, I'm going to do a terrible bit of pimping here by putting the little thing where I say store, and it'll come with our store, because we have got many merchandises relating to all this tank watching situations. So by all means, support the channel with what we do. Anyway, there's free ways to support it by liking the stream or subscribing. That's free. That costs you nothing, and it also helps you keep an eye on things like, will you be streaming X thing later? Well, you'll get a notification if we do. So that's where you don't even have to ask. You'll be able to expect the notification. But we've also got ways of supporting such as membership programs and such as things like the store, buying things in the store. All the profits go towards the channel, trust me. I know, because I run the site. The site is looked after by L2 and things like that. So that's separate. But the store itself, they all go towards the channel. The channel is looked after by memberships, and all that goes into a specific account which allows for supporting what we do and many of our very interesting plans for the future. Watch this space. No. Doc Watson, what's your nickname for the tower? Go Tower McTower Face. Ah. You know what? I don't think we've thought of a nickname yet, and I think Jack, if he had a voice, would be jumping on and saying, no nicknames for the tower, please. Because the tower...
I'm
Go
calling it
on.
the launch tower. That's my nickname.
I'm calling it the Orbital Launch Site Tower, yeah. The launch tower, the launch integration tower. Anything like that is fine. Tower McTower Face, no, I don't think so. I think we over abused the use of nicknames for the cranes. We're not the only community that did it, so we can't be blamed for starting that. It's something where infrastructure, like, we're not going to start naming the ground support equipment tanks, are we? Like Bob, Sarah, Sue, and things like that. No. We're going to call them what they're called. So that's where we lose the nicknames. I think the biggest key thing was Elon confirming last night that Booster 3 is called Booster 3. Because the amount of people are saying, but Elon tweeted Booster 2 was going on for quite a while. to the point where we were trying to say, please, Elon, say Booster 3 and Booster 4 so we can just stop this. And he did last night. So thankfully, we can now name the vehicles what they're named. And that's something where I'm sure he'll change it in 2 weeks' time.
At least we don't make stuff up. People seem to think that we make stuff up.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
either we
Yeah,
are
yeah.
very good and we should go to Vegas to make some money, or we actually are not making stuff up.
It's something where I understood that when Elon tweets Booster 2, and then we say, no, the SpaceX is call it Booster 3. I would totally understand people thinking, well, Elon Musk has tweeted, who are you to say it's not? And I agree, that's so hard to do, but we have to stick our grounds because when the SpaceXs, and I'm not talking about one person, when the SpaceXs tell us something, we know that's real. And then the labels are saying BN3 still, they've not changed it to anything like Booster 2 or anything like that. It's something where you have to stick with your guns, and luckily, I think Elon either mistakenly called it Booster 2 at the time, or he realigned with what they are calling it anyway, which is Booster 3. So, end of that story. It's now being tweeted. Nobody will ask that question anymore. Rockwell, thank you very much for your support. Waking up for a tower lift. Thanks to NSF for the team for the live coverage. Well, thank you for your support. We won't be able to do this without your support. Trust me. Chris K, I cannot wait for next week. I'm going to be going. Oh, you're going to Starbase, Texas to see those great giants. So Chris K is going down. Actually, I remember Chris K's name from our Discord. I remember Discord. He actually is going to Starbase. He'll be seen with his own eyes. Enjoy your trip. HWM Hell Monkey, happy rollout lifting day. Happy rollout lifting day. There's a mouthful, it's a tongue twister. Thanks for the courage and the community organisation. No, thank you for your support as well. Appreciate it very much. Matthew Hughes, have you seen much evidence of parts that have rested the OLIT around Boca Chica so far? Has it only been these tower sections? Well, we've seen so many wacky and wild deliveries, which is always the case for Boca Chica Starbase, where you actually don't know what they're delivering because it's just strange devices and beams and rusty pipes and things like that. Sometimes you just don't know. You really just don't know what's happening with what's arriving. And it could be elements of the tower. I would not like to say it isn't. But as far as evidence of what we have seen arriving and being built are the tower sections, are the propellant production. Well, they're still building, I believe. They're building their own literally production propellant plant down near the production site. So that is something where we can say the sections they were building with the launch tower, and now they're all there bar one. And this section 7 is now being lifted. So that is something we can keep an eye on because, as we said earlier, it's the crane that will go on top and the grabby arms. I'm fascinated by these grabby arms, which will eventually be installed on the side because the grabby arms catching a huge booster, returning to the launch site, and then placing it back on the mount. We can only imagine what they will look like, but I just know they'll be fascinating enough to really be intriguing to just see how the heck they're going to work. Because when Elon first tweeted that about the mechanical grabby arms, I honestly thought it was a joke. I thought Elon was pulling people's legs on Twitter because as amazing as it would be for orbital boosters to return without landing legs and to be caught by the tower by arms and then placed back onto the launch mount, it just didn't seem realistic at all. But that's what they're doing. He confirmed it's real. It's true, it's happening. Philip, do you think that wood or gravel is one-off or going to be a regular plan for the booster? I have no idea what on earth you mean by that.
I
Michael,
think
do
they
you understand
mean
that question?
like the surface of the road. We've seen them place I think
Right.
said they might have been placing some wood planks near the launch site or near the production site, and we know that near the launch site they have sort of torn up the road as they do a lot of construction. I think, and we actually have seen this in some of our robots, they've been doing surveying all up and down Highway 4. So I think, if I had to guess, they're going to be doing some substantial road work in the near future to boost the tolerances of the road for heavy rollouts.
Thank you, Michael. Hunt's Games. Thank you for your support. But by the way, currently at Starbase, to view the rollout, you're actually there. You know, that's something I'm seeing more and more of, is that people are making pilgrimages to this place now. They really are. I mean, ever since the Hopper days, people were going out there thinking, this is something I've got to witness for my own eyes. And I myself, I want to go there probably in the winter. I am now double vaccinated. I am cleared to fly. So I want to go out there myself, obviously. But I think, judging from what I hear, I mean, you think Mary's amazing with all the daily videos she does when she's out there from dawn to dusk. The temperatures are ridiculous. The weather is so dynamic as well. It's wind, it's sandy, it's dusty, it's hot. It can pour with rain. It can be ridiculously crazy weather there. I think for someone from Yorkshire, you might be struggling with those kind of conditions, because when we get to like 80 degrees over here, we all start going swimming because it's too hot. So I don't know how I'll be able to cope with it myself. But well, I'll probably think winter time. That might be our version of summer, so we'll try that. I do believe soon we're going to have Thomas joining as well, so it'll give me a chance to allow for people to get a nice American voice on here. By the way, where are you all from? Because I'm hoping there's quite a lot of UK on here having to listen to my Yorkshire accent. But tell us where you are in chat. The moderators will appreciate it, but I don't care. Everybody put where you're from in chat, and we'll see what we'll see. UK, Wales. Thank God for that. There's a lot of UK, so a lot of people may just about understand what I'm talking about. It's where you get lots of Americans from, like, you know, Midwest who are like, who is this guy and what's his accent? Lots and lots of UK. Maryland, Germany, Denmark. Wow, that chat is scrolling quite fast. Actually, I didn't realize there's 6,500 people in here now. There's only about a couple of thousand when we first started. Wisconsin, Hereford, Scotland, Netherlands, lots of Netherlands. I'll tell you one thing, with the site, I get to see the stats of what on our NASA Spaceflight, the news site in the forum. A lot of people from the Netherlands, a lot of Dutch following spaceflight. It's quite surprising. They're very large for population size. They've got a lot of support for spaceflight. Bradford, a lot of Yorkshire. Hey, that's one thing we'll do. By the way, we'll do a meetup at some point. We'll do one of them like everyone else does. We'll do meetups, both regionally in the States, but we could do locally ones, pending the COVID situation. But I think that's, you know, that's coming to the point now where we can start planning things. So we'll do meetups in the UK for a start, and then we'll do UK meetups in the States and other countries as well.
And as you can see, we have another camera. This is, of course, from Mary. Who would have
Mary,
thought?
hey.
Mary is out there to give us a bit of a closer view than the robots are able to get this morning. So super appreciate her rolling out and getting us the spot. There's a lot of construction at the launch pad right now, like I mentioned with that highway. So not able to get as close as we have been for the previous lifts, but she is in the closest spot she can be at given the construction going on.
To answer the question, I'm not from Leeds. I work in Leeds. This is actually my lunch break. Would you believe? I work in Leeds, but I'm from York. People type in Leeds in chat. Please don't do that. I support my local team, York City. They're terrible. They're rubbish. They're in the pub league. But I am from York. I just work in Leeds. Sorry, Michael. I had to get that out of the way. You'll understand. Daniel, Raptors installed after Super Heavy is moved. See, that's the, I want to bring Michael in on this. Do we think Booster 3 will have Raptors installed during this ground testing? Are they going to do a static fire test?
If I had to guess, I don't think so. I think they're probably at this point saving all the Raptors they have for Booster 4. I mean, I would not be, I guess, shocked if they did get Raptors, but we haven't really seen much infrastructure at Test Stand A other than a couple pipes. So I'm thinking they're just setting up for a cryo-proof test on Test Stand A. I've not really seen, methane and LOX lines being hooked up, but I could have missed that. They are building. They're literally they were still working on the test stand last night as the booster is apparently possibly rolling out this morning. So it's very last minute at SpaceX. It's possible I missed something, but right now it appears it's just going to be a cryogenic proof test, I think.
Tom Boss has spent £2 of his well-earned money just to put footballs coming home. It is, Thomas, isn't it? Tom, you're true. It's true. It's happening. We're all getting optimistic now about that. Hopefully it's true. I don't want to jinx it too much by getting carried away with that. Travis from the Midwest, don't care about the accent, keep up the good content. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, because it is quite surreal where we've got this a coverage of mainly American. I tell you one thing, it is mainly American rockets and obviously international rockets, but hopefully soon we'll have UK launches. There's the horizontal launch site down in the southwest, which we're hoping we'll see Virgin Orbit arrive, which we covered yesterday with their first operational launch, which went well. But also in the north of Scotland and the Shetlands, even there's going to be 2 launch sites they're planning, at least hopefully, if they get past all these issues with Orbex and people like that. So there's lots of potential. We'll see a orbital launch from the UK, and yes, I'll be there. So that'll be interesting. Hopefully, that'll be more on key where I'm covering a UK launch. It's actually a heck of a drive because it really is the north of Scotland. It literally is like 8 hours from Yorkshire. But it's something where you got to go to it because that'll be historic. Because the UK in space has always been involved, but it's never been involved as much as it should be. It's always been contracted out, part of ESA and things like that. We are still part of ESA, by the way. Nothing was affected by Brexit. That's a different kind of kettle of fish. So we are still involved with ESA, but it's something where we're launching our own rockets from our own side. We could do our Jim Bridenstine American rockets from UK soil, because it literally will be, apart from Orbex, who are mainly UK. So hopefully we'll get to see our own domestic rockets launching from domestic soil. Actually, yeah, Blaze brings up a good question there. Maybe an idea to organise Starbase pilgrimages from the UK, UEU, fly in major airports, arrange groups, BC, Force, T-Lance, and NASA spaceflight tours. The latter might be a bit of an issue because right now no one's getting real tours. I think he has said he wants to open up the high bay bar to the public at some point, but I think that would be specially invited public, and I think it will be a while off. This is an operational test center, let's face it. The fact that we can even watch this is something, because we've seen with Blue Origin's site, you can only take views from miles away. No one's allowed in. And you're certainly not allowed to film it from anywhere nearby because it's part of the restricted area. But it's this Starbase where you can literally drive Brownsville and then drive down Highway 4 to Starbase, Boca Chica Village, a place like that. It's pretty amazing. I would recommend it's still not that time where mass groups should be turning up for it. Let's respect the locals, not least Mary, where you don't want thousands of people turning up on a doorstep because they're all going down to see these stips. But I think at some point, I can totally understand individual pilgrimages to go down there and just see the whole place and just take it in. Also, you got South Padre Island where you can see it from across the waters. So there's lots of options you've got there. And I do believe Thomas fan club, get ready. We do believe Thomas arriving on comms. Everybody stand by, Thomas fan club. He is here, the man, the legend, Thomas Burkhardt. You're going to save me from getting fired by letting me get on back to work, aren't you, Thomas?
Dude, what an intro. I don't know if I can live up to that, all that hype, but yeah, how's it going, guys? We're getting close to finishing this dang tower, aren't we? We've got like this section and one more, I think. So
Yep.
we're getting there.
And the last section's only like 2/3 for normal section, so
Yeah,
it's not going to be much taller than this.
right. But yeah, it looks like more progress. And again, I mean, the reason we keeping an eye on this construction is because this is probably the big ticket for getting ready for an orbital flight. They need this tower ready, they need this launch site ready, and yeah, good to see that the progress is continuing. I don't know what I mean. Did I miss anything other than yeah, they started lifting this section? I saw Elon went on a tweet storm. I'm sure we've been talking about that too.
Yeah, and we also, of course, know that Elon tweeted the booster rollout was going to be tomorrow, very early this morning, but we think he might mean today based on the road closure that is now
Right.
fact. So it might have been the type of thing where Elon sleeps from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. every day. So his tomorrow starts at 3 a.m.
Yeah, that would make sense. So I guess we're keeping an eye on that as well. And that would be booster 3, which would be rolling out for ground testing because he said that that would not be a flight booster. But nevertheless, the first Super Heavy to roll out for testing would still be significant. So keeping an eye on that as well. Yeah, I believe, Crispy, are you gonna hop off on comms here for a bit?
I think he's already gone. He
I
said,
think he might be. I think that might be a very strong yes. So, Chris, thank you for holding down comms for a bit today. I really appreciate it.
and we hope you don't lose your job.
I hope so. I'll go ahead and pick up some. I know we got a whole bunch of questions here, so I'll keep those coming here. Oh well, okay. So yeah, we did just talk about the booster rollout. We're keeping an eye on when that'll happen. It'll either be today or tomorrow. It depends on what Elon actually meant by tomorrow, because it was so early in the morning. But yeah, that's what we're looking at for that road closure. There are other options that road closure could be for. It could be for some road work. It could be for rolling out something else, but some ground tanks or something. But I think that booster rollout is a good candidate. We'll just have to keep an eye on it.
Well, the checkpoint started earlier than usual, and DOS said they
Mhm.
had some planks out, so I think it is more than likely for the booster rollout.
Okay, gotcha. And a question here that if we think Starship will launch to orbit before 20, well, okay. The question says, do you think Starship will launch to orbit before 2021? It is 2021. I'm assuming you mean before the end of 2021. I think that is becoming less and less likely, especially since they have to make some adjustments to the Super Heavy design into Booster 4. There's a lot of ground equipment that needs to be done. Like you said, I mean, you can see there's only those 4 ground tanks, 2 of which are shelled, if I understand the progress correctly, um, which is about halfway to finishing that orbital launch site tank farm. They still need work on the orbital launch mount. Obviously, they're working on the tower. The tower has been getting really good progress. But there are some other ground infrastructure items that need to be finished that have been pretty slow, especially those GSE tanks, the ground support equipment tanks for the fuel and the other commodities. I think that is a sign that there may be a bit of time before an orbital launch attempt, even if the vehicles are ready. I mean, I think they're probably in a position to begin stacking Starship 20 pretty soon because I think they've got obviously they have a lot of flight experience with the high altitude flight tests, and there shouldn't be anything too drastic as far as stacking the orbital vehicle other than installing vacuum Raptor engines, which of course uh, NSF spotted the first one of those arriving in Boca Chica. So they're progressing there. But as far as getting Booster 3 through testing, that could even indicate more changes they need. They could end up moving to Booster 5 or something like that for an orbital flight if the ground testing on Booster 3 reveals things. So there's a lot of things that still need to be done, and we're into the second half of 2021 right now. It's too early to rule it out. There is time, and if Booster 3 testing goes really well and the launch site comes together nicely, would certainly be possible, but I think it is seeming more likely that we're looking at 2022 as a much more realistic target. But we know the SpaceX teams are going to be pushing towards 2021 as best as they can. And if that testing goes well, it's still possible for sure.
That yellow crane continues to make progress. It's not moving right now, I don't think, but it has moved quite a bit from when we started the stream this morning. That crane is heading to Pad A in preparations of lifting the Super Heavy booster onto the test stand. And there it
Gotcha.
goes. It's actually moving again right
Yeah.
there.
So yeah, there's another sign that that road closure is in fact for Super Heavy rollout. So that'll be very exciting. Um, Some people asking about the different boosters and their roles. Yeah, Booster 4 or B4 is the booster currently assigned to the orbital launch attempt. where Booster 3, the one that is currently in the high bay, will be a ground test vehicle, as they've had to make some design changes between the two boosters. Elon was tweeting about that last night. But if they are going to still roll out Booster 3 because that gives them some ground testing. Maybe they can do some static fire testing. Maybe they'll just be cryogenic proof testing or stuff like that. But there's definitely still some use to that booster. So Brian asking if the fraking crane will need to be extended for the final tower section. I don't know. I believe there is one taller configuration of the crane, but I don't know if it is required for that last section. Remember, that last section is also slightly shorter than all the other sections. I don't know, Michael, have we heard anything regarding if we'll need more crane parts for the last engine? Because that could cause some time between this lift and the last one.
No, I'm not sure. And like you said, by eyeballing it, it seems like it's going to be really close.
Yeah. All right. So we'll keep an eye out, but not sure yet. Question here, is the road still down to one lane partly? I know they were working on the road, doing some road work, but is it, I would assume it is at least 2 lanes to somewhere where they can roll out the booster, if that's what they're preparing to do today. Do we know what the status of that road work is?
Nope, I don't think. I mean, I think Doss had driven past it earlier, but Mary's at the production site obviously right now, giving us this view. So I don't think we have eyes on the current road status.
Okay. Up in Das says in our back channel, it's back to 2 lanes as of yesterday afternoon. So there we go. Thanks, Das.
That's referring to the site, the part at the launch site, I think, not the part of the production site. But I think the
Okay.
question was about the road at the launch site. So yes, the launch site is now
Yeah.
2 lanes.
Okay. So they should be able to conduct a rollout if that is indeed the plan today. Dan asking about the scaffolding on each section of the tower. You know, I don't know if we know exactly what all that is for and why it's still there. There have been some people pointing out that those kind of the big, thicker columns on the corners of the tower are actually hollow, and near on the bottom of the tower there are anchors for concrete. It is possible that those actually get filled with concrete once all the sections are stacked, and maybe the scaffolding is some access for that. But that's pure speculation. There could
But
be some, once the sections are actually stacked, there could be more work that has to be done that scaffolding needs to be in place before it's removed.
I mean, that would make sense. Maybe my one question is if that was the case, I would think it would take a long time for that concrete to cure because we saw when they filled the pilings for the launch mount, which they're metal on the outside, but they filled those pipes with concrete. It took quite a while for that to cure.
Well, maybe that is why we're seeing this launch tower kind of stacked before the rest of the orbital launch site. I mean, they've still got a lot of work to do on the mount, there has been a whole lot of work on that launch mount recently, and they've got the whole tank farm. But if they've got the tower stacked and the concrete poured and they're just waiting for it to cure, they can work on other stuff while that happens. So I wonder if that's why the tower is one of these first things that's gonna probably be completed. At least the stacking of it. A question, do we know if the launch pad is going to survive after static firing a super heavy booster? So the booster 3 will likely go over to the suborbital launch site. So it won't be sitting up on that high launch mount that's at the orbital site, which of course isn't done yet. But depends on, I think, how many engines they want to put on the first one. They could just put 3 engines on the super heavy booster, in which case it's no different than a Starship static fire. And they could probably survive a few more engines. I don't know if a 29 engine complement at the suborbital pad would be a good idea. but I don't know that it wouldn't be, especially if it's just a very brief static fire. But um, I don't know. I think the orbital launch mount would be better suited for that purpose. So maybe what I'm guessing is they could do is have not a full engine complement on Booster 3, if Booster 3 will even do static fire testing. Again, it could be proof testing rather than actual engine testing, but um, we'll have to wait and see, of course, because we don't really have a whole lot of info regarding their testing plans.
That tower has been. The lift has stopped for a couple of minutes now. I'm not quite sure why, but we'll see if it resumes.
And question asking if we think a ground test might include a hop. I think definitely not. Booster 3, first and foremost, doesn't have any landing legs, so it can't really do a hop. And I believe ground tests refer to it staying on the ground, at least, well, it's supposed to stay on the ground. Obviously, if something goes wrong, I guess we never know. We've seen cryogenic proof test end in unintentional hops, but I believe the intended testing will not include a hop test for Booster 3. Also, this shot right here is awesome with the orange lighting in the background. It looks really cool. Question, do we think that there will eventually be pipes running from the propellant production equipment to the launch pad? I think that would make a lot of sense rather than having the truck, propellant from where it's produced to the launch site, but um, we don't have firm info on that, I don't think. I don't know if that's shown up in any of the like the site plans that we've caught a glimpse of through some public documentation and stuff. So um, it's also a pretty long route between the two spots, and there is an environmental preserve in the area. Um, but they could run it. I mean, if they run it right alongside a road, which is kind of what happens at the Kennedy Space Center and stuff like that. I mean, they've kind of already got that footprint. So I don't know. I could see them going either way. It would be, I feel like it would be preferred to have that set up, but I don't know if they can or not.
Jack says he doubts it because it's a long way and there's a wildlife reserve on, I think, both sides actually. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much space there is to work with on the sides of Highway 4, but like I
Right.
mentioned earlier, they are actively surveying Highway 4. So I'm not sure if that's for potentially beefing up the highway to support rollouts on a more regular basis without the road crumpling as it is now, or if potentially maybe there's some other piece of infrastructure like a pipe that they plan to build.
That would make a lot of sense. It does not seem like a very practical long-term goal to have trucks all the time between the production site and the orbital launch site. But there are obviously, like you said, some obstacles to putting a pipeline in, so maybe they're working on that.
It does look like I'm doing an A/B test. It has started going up a bit. It's
Okay,
going so slow you can't really see it with your naked eye, but if you
right.
rewind to the last time I cut it to Mary's camera, the tower section is slightly higher.
And asking about the new naming scheme, yeah, basically Booster 3 and Booster 4, which can be abbreviated as B3 and B4, and then the ships, the starships, are now Starship 20 or Ship 20 and S20. Um, SpaceX is not known for consistent naming schemes. We all understand this, but that is the current naming scheme, and it is pretty simple. It's not there's no serial numbers or there's no SNs and BNs and stuff like that. It's a little simpler right now. See how long it lasts, but that is the current naming scheme. So I think we all know what we're talking about when I say Ship 20 or Booster 3. Um, hopefully it's not too confusing. I question if they could try and stack SN16 on top of Booster 3. So I doubt it. We know SN16 is not an orbital capable ship. They could do like fit checks or something like that, but I don't think that's going to be something they'll do with SN16. Um, Elon did mention in passing that SN16 could fly on its own a hypersonic flight test, but I do not know if that's still actually planned or if that's just something they considered but aren't really doing. Um, I don't know if we've heard anything about the possibility of stacking it on top of a booster. Um,
I don't think
although
it can. I think SM20 is the first with the systems that will allow it to be integrated with a super heavy booster.
mhm.
I could
But
be
it's still
wrong,
that
but I
yeah.
don't think so.
That still tracks with, I know one of Elon's recent tweets was that they want to stack a Starship on top of a booster pretty quickly here. But they could do that with as soon as S20 is stacked, and I think that would be relatively soon. Um, that should be a shorter term thing than a booster stacking, which obviously takes a little longer because it's bigger. So that's still possible, but I don't think it'll be SM16. A couple super chats as well here. One asking for a meetup in New Zealand, maybe around a Rocket Lab launch. I know we're definitely looking at bringing back some NSF meetups and stuff like that. Uh, we have like one NSF team member that lives in New Zealand, but I'd be down. That'd be cool. Robert with the new membership as well. Thank you so much. Steven, thanks for the support as well. Thomas asking us to talk about Black Arrow. Well, I'm assuming that's from when Chris B was on commentary to talk about some UK rockets. Thanks for the support. And Johan as well. Thank you so much for all the support, everyone. We really appreciate it. And to revisit some of the, how many sections are needed to finish this tower. This is the second to last section for the orbital launch tower. And there is one final one that's a little bit shorter. It's a smaller section, but it's the final section that goes on top. After this, some people asking about the second tower, because there will be 2 orbital launch sites. I don't know if they're going to proceed into building that site right away, or if they'll focus on getting one site completely ready before expanding to a second one. Um, so yeah, not sure if there will be a second tower anytime soon, or if they'll stick to the first one for now. And also, we've got word from on the ground, Mary reporting that there is some personnel at the top of the tower ready to receive that section number 7, which is the one that's currently being lifted. So um, there are people up top getting ready to they put people on top of the tower so they can help guide that section into place and attach it. So that's a good sign that the lift is proceeding. We know it's a little slow, but that section is still going up, and there are now people on top of the tower, says Mary. So appreciate the report, Mary, and another good sign that we're getting close. Noah asking, how long do you think it will be until they're done constructing the launch table, which is like that top structure that will go on the orbital launch mount? No idea. It's hard to say how much work is really needed on that structure because we don't know what it'll really look like when it's done. Um, so it's hard to put an estimate on how much longer they'll need to work on that before they can roll it out and install it. But uh, let's see more. I'm continuing to pull questions, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in chat. Continuing to pull them out here. A question if they will add a lightning tower like the pads over at Cape Canaveral. Yeah, this tower will have one big lightning tower, kind of like how they have it set up at Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. It's one kind of sort of fixed tower that works as the crew access tower in Kennedy Space Center. This tower will likely also become a crew access tower at some point, but there will be one lightning tower on top of this. And when they build the second launch site with its own tower, that will get its own lightning tower as well. There won't be separate lightning towers like pad 40 or 39B, but there will be a lightning tower on top of the launch tower.
You can see the 2 taglines from Mary's camera there as the crews on the ground assist the crane. And
And
I am still
go ahead.
watching the tower, or sorry, I am still watching the booster, but as you can see, it has not made any progress yet.
Still chilling in the high bay, but we'll keep an eye on it. And Jacob is asking about the possibility of launching starships out of countries that don't have a coast but have large unpopulated areas. So if you go to some of the spaceports around the world, such as Baikonur Cosmodrome is probably the most prominent example. Baikonur in Kazakhstan is nowhere near a coast, but there's a whole big area of unpopulated desert, so they can still safely launch rockets and drop stages shortly downrange that without endangering any populated areas or anything like that. If those conditions exist elsewhere, that would still be safe to operate Starship launches. It doesn't necessarily have to be water per se, especially since into operational flights, the Super Heavy booster will be coming back and landing at the launch site. So you don't need any downrange landing assets or anything like that. So as long as you have that safety area, yeah, that would still be perfectly feasible. And Ted, thank you for the support there. Also, Thomas Anfang with a super chat question that I accidentally made disappear. Michael, do you have the ability to recover that?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks. I had a question about the booster size, I believe, so I'll get back to that. Greg Smith, thank you so much for the support as well. Appreciate it. And a question here asking, do we see Starship being outfitted to service the Hubble Space Telescope at any point? That is one of the uses for Starship that I think is definitely under consideration, the ability to go up and rendezvous with spacecraft in low Earth orbit. The Hubble Space Telescope is one example of using it to actually service the telescope and maybe can extend its mission. Of course, before the end of this year, NASA is launching the James Webb Space Telescope, which is, while slightly different than the Hubble Space Telescope, is supposed to effectively act as its replacement, which may mean that they don't necessarily want to put forth a lot of effort to extending the Hubble's mission. Of course, Hubble right now is undergoing some issues and they're working some technical issues with some computers on board that perhaps a servicing mission could help resolve. But obviously, Starship won't have that capability before the end of the year, and they're working on launching James Webb. So I don't know if there'll actually be demand for a servicing mission to the Hubble Space Telescope. But if there is, I think that Starship could be a vehicle capable of doing that once they have a crew-rated version ready to launch. But that could be a couple years to crew-rate a new vehicle like that. So not sure if that's something that will end up happening, but it's definitely a possibility through the Starship architecture. And back to this question here from Thomas asking that Elon said on Twitter that an 18-meter Starship doesn't make sense based on cost per ton, but he's arguing that you could need larger ships for colonization. Does orbital construction begin to make sense? I think I only skim read the early morning / late night Elon Twitter storm, but I know he was saying that making the vehicles too big comes up with a problem that is also apparent in the airline industry right now. That ships don't necessarily need to be so big for reducing cost per ton. At some point, there's diminishing returns to that end. So, and it looks like maybe based on some of their research that Starship may have a similar scenario. In the past, this is different than what they've said in the past. Elon has said that the current starships will look like rowboats compared to the future ones. But maybe they're shying away from that, and maybe this is the biggest starship that they get, and maybe this is the size, the maximum size that they want to see. In the event that there is demand for a bigger ship, but it doesn't make sense to build it here on the ground, I guess orbital construction could be a thing. I'm not sure if that's something that they'll look at, though, based on their most recent comments saying that smaller starships might be more useful. Um, I don't know. It's hard to say, just because even the current starship is such a different vehicle than anything else that is going to or will fly. It's hard to know exactly what the market's going to look like and what demand there will be for those kind of payloads. But um, we'll see. Orbital construction is always a weird problem. You have to build some sort of space station to act as your production facility, and then you need to get raw materials up there. And at some point, it becomes there are less benefits to building them in orbit than it is to just build them on the ground. But um, we'll see. I don't think Elon has entertained the idea of orbital construction in the past, but I'm not sure how serious that was or anything. Right now, I think the current version of Starship will be useful for their purposes for several years to come before they need to look at any different sized vehicles. Abel asking if the orbital launch tower will have a skybar, assuming like the high bay. I don't think so. It makes some sense to have some sort of semi-public access to the production site. Having that access at the launch site has a whole lot of security issues to it, so I'm gonna guess no. Appreciate the question there. And like we mentioned, there's a very little, if zero, chance to Booster 3 conducting a hop test. Booster 3 is going to be a ground test article, at best that we can tell. And Tony's saying that scaffolding is for welding the sections together. I believe they're doing that as they stack the sections, though, right, Michael? Like the sections that are already stacked have been welded, I'm
They're
assuming?
not welded or bolted.
Oh, okay. So perhaps it is that. All right, a good point. Thank you, Tony. I know we were still talking about a couple streams ago about that, filling them with concrete too, but it's possible the scaffolding is unrelated to that, or that they're not filling them with concrete. I'm pretty sure they're filling them with concrete. I'm pretty sure we saw, equipment and parts of the structure that are very clear indicators that there will be concrete at some point, but guess we'll have to wait and see, as with most things around Boca Chica these days. And to answer Dennis's question here, like we just mentioned, they are bolted together, so yeah. Is it possible that the tank farm could be used for the first flight without all the tanks complete? I think they need a complete tank farm before the first flight, just so that they can conduct proper fueling loading operations and things like that. I suppose that's not completely confirmed, unless Michael, you've heard something, but I'm pretty sure they'll need the full tank farm, right?
Yeah, it seems likely at least.
Yeah.
And on that note, I do want to point out it does seem like there might be a problem with the orbital tank farm. We have seen 2 GSC tanks roll out I don't know how many weeks ago now, it was early May, I think, and then nothing has happened since. GSC-3 has sat at the production site for several weeks without rolling out, and GSC-4 does not really seem to be making much progress either. It's been in the mid-bay for quite a while, so not really sure what's going on, but the orbital tank farm has not been progressing like we thought it would. GSC tanks 1 and 2 came in short succession, and then there's been this huge gap of time that continues. I mean, the gap between GSC 2 rolling out and GSC 3 rolling out is still getting longer. So, not sure when GSC 3 is going to roll out, and they've also not stacked the cryo shell at the pad right now onto one of the existing GSC tanks. So, not sure the reasoning is, but it does appear there might be an issue.
Like we said, that's a big ticket towards getting this launch site prepared is that tank farm, and like we mentioned, progress seems to have slowed down or even stalled recently. So that's why, when people ask, are there going to be an orbital attempt this year? We're cautious to say that that's possible just because there could be holdups with the construction of the orbital launch site, which is perfectly understandable. There's a lot of very important to be very reliable to conduct launch operations. So if they need to take some extra time and make sure the site is set up properly, that makes a lot of sense. So, but we'll continue to report on its status, and we'll see what exactly the time frame may end up being. I know they're pushing for this year. That doesn't mean that it's not some big failure. If, by the way, if they don't get it done by this year, if they can get Starship to launch capability next year, that will still be an unprecedented development pace, especially for a rocket of this scale. So nothing that we're all too concerned about, I would say. Let's see. A question here from Doc Watson. Thank you for this super chat support. If in say 10 years you get a chance to go to Mars on a 2-year working contract, what would you do there? I don't know if that's a question for us specifically or just in general, what would anyone do on a working trip to Mars? Obviously, it depends on your occupation and why you were given that opportunity to go to Mars. If we're talking about 10 years of now, we're probably still in the phase of initial buildup of some surface base of some kind. So you might need engineers to design some solutions to problems they're having, building out the site, design some new systems, think about solutions to various life support or infrastructure needs. Or obviously, if all that stuff is designed, you might want engineers on site to help troubleshoot during construction and things like that. So obviously, there's a big need for engineers. You'll need sort of operations folks, spaceflight operations people to help coordinate Starship landings and Starship launches from Mars, conducting fueling operations from the inside to resource utilization ISRU equipment that is refueling starships on Mars, which I think 10 years from now SpaceX will want that stuff online, because that's probably going to be some of the payload on the very first uncrewed landings, is equipment to start preparing to produce fuel, excuse me, on Mars. So stuff like that. Obviously, you'll need medical personnel to tend to the people that are living on Mars. So that could be occupation that goes that way. Um, you'll need people to prepare food. You'll need chefs on Mars. I mean, when you're conducting such a long-term operation, there's a lot of occupations that haven't necessarily historically been part of spaceflight because we just made astronauts do everything. But we're expanding a long-term and higher population stay off planet Earth. A lot of occupations will have roles to play in living and working elsewhere than Earth. So there could be a lot of different things to do. I know from my perspective, I have an engineering background, so I'd be there designing, building, testing, operating stuff. But um, don't know if I'll get that chance. It would be pretty cool. But yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that we'll need, a whole lot of people that we'll need to make a Mars settlement successful. So there's a lot of different opportunities there.
And Thomas, you're talking about if they would need to extend crane to the eighth
Hmm.
segment. Well, the eighth segment is a little bit shorter, but I don't know if it's short enough based on the length of the cable at the top of the crane right now.
Hmm.
I mean, and the seventh section still needs to go higher to clear the tower, so I don't think there's going to be enough space. I'm not a crane expert. I'm just eyeballing what I'm seeing right now and
Hmm.
thinking that the crane might have to be extended again.
I think I'd probably lean that way, but again, I am also just eyeballing it, so I don't want to sound too definitive there, but um, would not be surprising if some crane extensions are on the way for that last section. Is that last section ready to go, by the way? Is it completed at the production site, or are they still kind of constructing it?
Yep, it is. It doesn't have like the scaffolding on top. I'm not sure if they're going to need that because it's the final section, but
Right.
there is also the potential they're going to outfit it with commodities. I don't know if they're going to lift the lightning tower separately, for example. I mean, that would make sense to me to lift the lightning tower separately, but
Yeah,
there might be some other things they outfit on it before they lift it.
gotcha. Let's see. Do we know what tests will be conducted with Booster 3 on the ground? We don't know exactly, but our speculation would probably be proof testing at least, because they have not done any proof testing for super heavy boosters. If they decide to install engines, they could do some static fire testing, although there could be limitations to that when they're doing it at the suborbital site. Don't know how many engines that site can actually handle as far as a static fire goes. Obviously, super heavy is way more than a starship, but they could do some lower engine count static fires, I think would be feasible. So maybe that too, but we don't know exactly. after the orbital flight, what is next is a question. More orbital flights. I mean, some of the stuff they'll have to demonstrate pretty early on is that on-orbit refueling capability. So they're going to want 2 ships in orbit at the same time with the refueling valves installed, the little basically docking ports at the aft of the vehicle. That's something that they're definitely going to want to test early on. That's a huge part of the human landing system architecture to support NASA's missions to the moon. It is necessary for basically any Starship missions beyond Earth orbit. So that's going to be something they'll want to begin working on to see if they have any design changes needed there. Um, that'll be early test flights. Those test flights may also include Starlink flights, getting more Starlink satellites up alongside the Falcon 9 fleet. So that's another thing that Starship will be doing early on, but that'll all be preceded by just demonstrating that it can get to orbit and back safely. So um, that is the big ticket. But yeah, there's a couple other things that we know that are on the cards for the near term for Starship missions to orbit. They could also do some Earth-to-Earth test flights on suborbital trajectories, depending on how early or quickly they want to get that capability online. Phil with the super chat just pointing out that when we talk about SpaceX is a little behind their schedules, that is pretty comparable to private a private version of the Apollo program. If you look at the Apollo program development schedule, that was pretty insane too, and Starship's kind of that caliber as far as how quickly they're developing some stuff. And but yeah, when we say that SpaceX seems to be having holdups, that certainly doesn't mean that they're slow or anything like that. They are behind schedule compared to the optimistic and ambitious timelines that they set, because SpaceX likes to do things quickly. So um, yeah, that's a good comment there. Appreciate the support. Bobby asking, can we discuss the technology or concerns of Starship connecting to Super Heavy? Love your coverage. Appreciate the kind words there, Bobby. But as far as connecting, so we're talking about the staging connections. Starship and Super Heavy need to interface a couple different ways. If you look at the inner stage of a Falcon 9, there's a sort of load-bearing structure that connects the Merlin engine on the upper stage to the load-bearing structure of the Falcon 9 first stage. Same thing for Falcon Heavy. And that sort of structure needs to interface and disconnect properly at stage separation. I'm assuming Starship and Super Heavy will have a similar structure to help carry all the loads during launch, all the forces. There will also need to be fueling connections because unlike other vehicles where the fueling connections are with umbilicals that connect to the outside of the vehicle, Super Heavy will be fueled from the bottom of the vehicle through the orbital launch mount, and also Starship will be fueled through Super Heavy, basically through those same mounts that Starship will use once it's on orbit to do on-orbit refueling. So those connections need to interface properly and not only connect when you're stacking the vehicles, but then disconnect during stage separation during launch. So they need to work on that. So those are the kind of interfaces we're talking about when they're connecting Starship to Super Heavy for the first time.
If you have questions, keep tagging us in chat at NASA Spaceflight. And as we wait for this launch tower segment to be slid on top of the 6 existing segments, we will take more questions.
Yeah, and we've got a question here, actually. I think, Michael, you may know the answer to this. Pat is asking about a cryo shell that was rolled out a long time ago but not fitted over a tank. If we look at the tank farm that is at the orbital launch site, we see 2 of the big cryo shells. Is only one of them over an actual tank?
Yes, so, well, no, actually, none of them are over a tank. The
Oh,
tank,
okay.
there's the 2 silver tanks you can see on the left. The white shell directly behind the rightmost silver tank is a water tank, actually, so there's no ground support equipment tank inside of that thing insulated. It's just a water tank that was made out of the same material they're using
Okay.
to insulate the other GSC tanks. So the silver tanks are what will store cryogenic propellant and liquid nitrogen. The white outer shell is what's going to insulate it with nitrogen to help keep the propellant cold. The white tank on the right is a cryo shell. It's not a water tank. It is currently on a stand for a GSE tank. There is no GSE tank underneath it, so that's a temporary staging area for that shell. We expect it to be lifted on top of one of the existing silver tanks, the GSE tanks at the pad.
Got it. Also, as a very brief description, we are following that OneWeb launch, which is coming up shortly. I'll provide some updates once that gets off the ground for those who may be interested, but we're going to keep our cameras pointed at Boca Chica because none of us have cameras out in Vostokny in Russia, but um, I'll keep an eye on that for us. But in the meantime, I will also continue bringing up these questions because there's a whole lot of them. Ernest asking, what will Starship look like in the future? Will world marks still be visible? I don't know if that'll ever really go away. I think we've been pleasantly surprised by how clean some of these starships have started to look. I mean, if you go back to Starship Mark 1 and look at Starship SN15 or SN16, the latest ones, the improvement is drastic. And I don't know how much longer it will be until it kind of reaches the point where this is as clean as the Starship will ever look coming out of the production line. But maybe it'll look even better at some point. But right now, I mean, they look pretty proper as far as a space vehicle goes now. I don't think they no longer look like they were built in a shed somewhere, you know? Um, don't know if they'll get even better, but. And let's see, just some kind words from Ion saying thanks for the coverage. Appreciate the support there. And a big super chat here from Ethanol. Thank you so much for the support. Asking how will the Starship system have the ability to be immediately reusable? Falcon 9 still need to be maintained between each flight. That is true, but basically, not only did Falcon 9 act as SpaceX's first operational launch vehicle family, operating in reusability, um, they've gotten a lot of success to that front. They're really able to offer some reliability and cost reduction aspects with that. But it is not the level of reusability that they need for a Starship and Super Heavy architecture. You're right. That jump will be informed by all of the data and all the lessons that they've learned from flying Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. Getting those boosters back, getting those engines back, getting the grid fins back, all of that has given them a whole lot of data as to how to make vehicles that are truly reusable in the sense that they can fly multiple times a day even. It takes less than a day to turn them around. Getting closer to what, they often call airliner-like operations. Those things will include design aspects to the Raptor engine based on what they've learned from Merlin. It will be aspects such as heat shield materials that are more reusable and don't need as much work or replacement between flights. Um, data regarding how tanks fatigue when they go through a launch cycle from the pressures at launch to being exposed to basically vacuum to then coming back. That can fatigue and cause fatigue cracking in tanks. So that's a phenomenon that they now know a lot about and will inform how to build tanks that can withstand a whole lot of cycles between flights, like the ones they're building for Starship. So all of that will be informed by the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and also some Dragon reuse will have some aspects to that as well. Um, and so that's how they're going to be able to improve their reusability by taking all the lessons learned from the Falcon and Dragon fleets. Now, obviously, once Starship starts flying, they may learn some more lessons and need some more design changes to reach their goals, but they will be a lot closer to that operational capability that they want. Jacob asking, what will happen to the suborbital pads once Starship is operational? Could they still be used for Earth-to-Earth test flights or similar missions? Elon has mentioned in tweets that some of the ways they'll get ships out to the sea launch platforms, the Phobos and Deimos, should once those come online, is literally flying ships out there, which could be a suborbital flight, which means yes, in theory they could have vehicles lifting off from the suborbital pad still. Those could also end up just becoming test stands for super heavies and Starship static fire test stands and things like that, rather than launch sites. Um, to get super heavies out to the launch sites, you'll need the orbital launch mounts anyway. So not sure if there will really be flights from those pads in the future, or if they'll just be test stands. But I think they'll be able to find some use for them either way, even once the orbital site is online.
And I also think they might be used for static fire testing of the starships before they're stacked on top of Super Heavy.
Right, that would make sense. And that would be a good use as a test stand. Here is a very curveball question. Could they strap 2 Falcon 9s to the side of Super Heavy to give it more power at launch? I guess in theory they could design some attachment points and stuff to do that, but I don't think that's something that they're going to look at. You would need a new launch structure. You would need to redesign the Super Heavy booster to take the load. So that's not as trivial as it is in, say, Kerbal Space Program or something like that. Don't think that's going to happen. It's not going to be a Falcon Heavy side booster ordeal with the Starship and Super Heavy architecture. Super Heavy is sized so that it is a super heavy lift vehicle without any side boosters or anything like that.
People are asking when the booster will roll out. There is a road closure scheduled for today. We did see a lot of deputies in the area, but Elon also tweeted tomorrow. We don't know if Elon meant today or tomorrow. So right now, I can tell you the booster has not moved, and if it does start moving, I will immediately cut away to show the booster, at least in a side-by-side. But
Mhm.
right now, all our cameras that you can see are focused on the tower, which, as you can see, is now having its 7th segment raised and translated over on top of the existing structure.
Is there also a road closure for tomorrow by any chance, Michael?
Nope.
Nope. That obviously that doesn't mean that they can't file one, but um, that is another sign that they do actually mean that they're targeting today, which seemed like tomorrow if you were up late last night into this morning, which might have been the situation with Elon's tweet, but we will see. Adam Kerman asking if we think there will be any issues with the aerodynamic stability of Starship and Super Heavy in flight, since the center of lift may be ahead of the center of mass. So, for those who may not be familiar, basically, a general rule of thumb in rocketry is that you want your center of pressure, it's actually not technically your center of lift, it's your center of pressure, basically the same thing though, to be behind your center of mass on the way up, which basically that just creates a naturally stable vehicle that you're not fighting to keep pointing the right direction. Um, that may be. Here's the thing: the control surfaces that are on Starship are not designed to generate lift. They're designed to generate drag when belly flopping. So on the way up, yet they will generate a non-zero amount of lift just because of how physics works, but um, it won't be as much as if they had like proper wings or anything like that. So the center of lift will probably still be above the center of mass, but that force won't be as huge as it could be, especially if you look at designs for like the dinosaur space plane or like the old crewed Dream Chaser planes where it wouldn't be inside a fairing. Those kind of architectures have that problem where you need to fight the center of lift by having a lot of control authority with your engines, a lot of gimbal authority. Starship Super Heavy will fight it the same way. You can compensate for having an off center of lift, center of mass balance by having engine control authority that will keep the vehicle in the right orientation. And Starship and Super Heavy can just do that. So I don't think it will be an issue. It is slightly different scenario than actual winged space planes on top, but that center of lift, center of mass balance can be achieved with some proper engine authority. And Raptors are very powerful, and they'll have a big cluster of gimbaling engines at the bottom to keep that balance. So don't think it'll be an issue, but it's a good thing to talk about. It's a cool sort of rocket engineering aspect that doesn't come up too often, but Starship Super Heavy definitely came up there. Also, I would be amiss if I did not report that OneWeb launch has lifted off from Vostokny, so I believe it is Flight 8 of the OneWeb constellation, one of the few competitors to SpaceX's Starlink constellation that is actually getting satellites up. There's a lot of others proposed that haven't reached launches yet, and of course, when Super Heavy and Starship come online, there will be more Starlink launches on those, and the Starlink constellation has a lot more satellites than the OneWeb constellation because Starlink is at a lower altitude, which has some benefits, but it also means that you need more satellites to get the same coverage. But some more sort of worldwide internet access constellations, which I think is a really cool mission, getting worldwide access to the internet via space. So it's a cool mission that both SpaceX and OneWeb and a lot of other companies are working on, and that mission is underway. Um, Draco asking about the second site. Is there a second site being developed? So the plans for Boca Chica do officially include 2 orbital launch sites. There will be a second tower, a second launch mount. I believe only 1 tank farm. I think the 1 tank farm can support both pads. But kind of like at the Kennedy Space Center when you have 39A and 39B, Launch Complex 39 has multiple launch sites. And the same is kind of true of the plans at Boca Chica. So um, don't know when that second site will be needed. They might hold off until the first flights from Site 1. I don't know. I don't think we have names for the orbital launch sites, right? There's no Pad A, Pad B nomenclature yet.
Yeah, so I think it's Orbital Pad A, Orbital Pad B is the name of the second site. I'm not sure how that's going to work with the ocean platforms. I think it's going to be
Right,
Deimos
okay.
and Phobos.
Right, yeah. Okay, so Pad A and Pad B. I'm assuming we are looking at Pad A. I would be kind of silly to build Pad B first, so I'm going to assume this is Pad A.
Yes, this is Pad A.
Yeah, yeah. So, but there will be a second one. I don't know. We were talking earlier. We don't know what the timeline for that will be, because they could conduct a lot of operations with Pad A before they need Pad B to come online.
It may
So
never
there
be
might
built
be some
to.
gap. And
I mean,
they also that's true. They could also say we actually only need one. So
they
I
may
think it would be
they
cool to
may
have
say
two.
it's better to launch from the ocean platforms, or it's better to spend that budget on Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center to give themselves another
Sure.
launch site. Um, the fact that they filed it is just giving
It's
themselves
future
an
proofing.
option, which with the environmental assessments, they're trying to give themselves the possibility of building the pad without having to spend months and months of environmental reviews once they make that decision.
Exactly. And Boca Charts asking, is BN 2.1 still called BN 2.1? Yeah, we're not changing any of the names retroactively. SN16 is still SN16. The test tanks are still called what they're called. SN15 still SN15. The names apply to future vehicles, Ship 20 and onward. We're not going back and renaming everything that already had a name. But yeah, appreciate the question there. Hey, Michael, can we get a booster 3 check by any chance? Seeing some
Oh yeah,
messaging in chat.
it has ever so slightly shifted into high base, so I will
Be
put
a
that
great
on the
time for a
screen.
side by side. Or just that. That works. Yeah, it looks like it has started to, it came out a little bit. We can get some sunlight off of it. So potentially Booster 3 rollout could be coming up soon. SpaceX doesn't want us to end the live stream. They said, "Oh, stacking's about to be done. Time to roll out a booster." So there you go, chat. Booster 3 potentially on the move, or at least getting ready to. I can't tell, is it moving right now, or do they just move it once and now it's
I think
sitting?
just move it to the right slightly.
Yeah. But there you go. There's that awesome side by side. We got, I believe that is Mary's view on the left with the launch tower, and then we've got a robotic camera pointed at the high bay. Very cool. Peter asking, how close could you be to a launching starship without the sound killing you? Not very close. It'd be a couple miles away. Um, I believe the exclusion zone for a Saturn V was basically right up until where the press site was, or still is, at the Kennedy Space Center, which is just about 3 miles. Starship is probably on that order of magnitude as far as sound goes. Now, that exclusion zone was not based on sound alone. Sound could get you a little closer. That was a blast danger area concern, which of course Starship Super Heavy will also have. So that will be more of a limiting factor than the sound levels. But yeah, you still need to be a couple miles away to protect your eardrums from the roar of 29 Raptor engines or 32 Raptor engines eventually. So yeah.
And the booster is coming out of the high bay as we speak, so I think I might update the stream title and
Yeah.
thumbnail because it seems like the tower lift might just be a treat. The first ever super heavy rollout is what I would consider to be the main event today.
And again, this is Booster 3, which is just now a ground test article. It's not for the orbital flight. It's not for any flight for that matter, not even a hub test most likely. But it is still a big milestone in super heavy testing to get some ground test with this test article. So, and again, it'll just be cool to see um, this thing rolling out. It's so big. Um, it's going to be to get a sense of scale with the Super Heavy booster. I know once it's at the launch site, I know there's going to be some Photoshop artists who will say, okay, we've seen what a Super Heavy looks like out at the launch site. Let's Photoshop a Starship on top and see what this is really going to look like. And that'll be really cool. You can see at the top of the booster, there's the mounting points for where I'm assuming grid fins will go at some point, but you can see there's no grid fins installed because it's not actually going to fly. But that's where the grid fins will go when they're ready for a flight ready booster, booster 4 at this point. And one
I think we might have lost Thomas, but hopefully he'll come back soon. Half Williams, thank you for the super chat. Yes, the booster is rolling, and it looks like we might be in for a marathon stream this morning. Do we know if we have seen any sightings for the orbital launch tower? That's a good question, Chris. I have not seen any myself, but perhaps we will see some soon. That you would think they're going to want to protect the elevator and all the internal equipment from the exhaust of 30 up to 31 Raptor engines. So I would not be surprised at all if that happens.
Anyway, I think you have me back.
Yes, you're back.
Okay, minor internet hiccup, my apologies. But I'll keep the questions going here. And a question about launching the Super Heavy booster with 29 engines from Boca Chica. Isn't it too loud? No. So SpaceX has planned full up Super Heavy Starship launches to occur from the Boca Chica launch site. That's why they're building this launch site right now. The exact reviews as far as what the exclusion zone will need to be and stuff like that is under review. There is a concern that the FAA and regulatory agencies will want the exclusion zone to be wide enough that it includes South Padre Island. That would be a major obstacle to launch operations from Boca Chica because that's a big populated area that you really can't practically just evacuate every time you want to conduct a launch. If the exclusion zone remains somewhat contained and doesn't include that, then I think that paves the way for regular operations from Boca Chica. And that review is going to be a big part of setting the stage for how often launches will occur from this launch site. It is partially why they're also pulling out sea launch platforms so that they can launch from anywhere in the world, and that will, of course, not have issues with sound levels and the exclusion zones and things like that. But um, the plan is for full up Super Heavy and Starship launches from Boca Chica. That is the current plan, and they are working on ensuring that that is something that they can do into the future. Dougal asking what goes in between a cryo shell and the inner tank. I believe nitrogen. Is that right, Michael?
Yes.
So yeah, some inert nitrogen, which acts as an insulator between the commodity that's in the inner tank and the outside cryo shell. Jeff asking, when it's all finished, will the tower support the full stack's mass or will it rest on the launch table or both? I believe the launch tower will have one arm to help maintain stability when you're stacking a Starship on top of the booster. I think that was mentioned by Elon once. They'll have an arm that kind of reaches out and just helps keep the top of the booster rigid, um, and keep it stable during stacking operations. But I don't know if it's weight bearing. The launch tower will need to support the weight of the fully fueled stack anyway, so I don't think the tower is really a weight bearing structure per se. It is mostly there to help with stacking operations, both with that keeping the stack stable possibly, and then the big thing will be there will be a crane on top to actually stack the starships on top of the super heavies. Eventually there will probably be a crew access tower if crew launches are a thing that occur from this site. And then, of course, whatever catch infrastructure is needed for returning super heavy boosters will also be on this tower. So those will be the main role, not necessarily weight bearing, other than holding the weight of an relatively empty super heavy booster when it returns to land. Joe asking, are the Phobos and Deimos launch pads part of the HLS contract? Should they properly test those systems before taking on larger tasks like orbital refueling? I do not believe that the sea launch platforms are part of the HLS contract, at least not explicitly. They have both this land-based pad in Boca Chica and the new pad that will go up at Launch Complex 39A. So I do not believe that they need sea launch platforms for a human landing system. Orbital refueling, however, is part of the human landing system 100%. So that's why I'm thinking that that will be tested before we see a whole lot of work on the sea launch platforms. Of course, they can be done in parallel, but that orbital refueling is a big priority to enabling those missions. So I think that'll be a very near-term testing goal once Starship is orbital. Ben asking how Starship will land at a pad or be caught by tower. Elon has mentioned the idea of also catching starships, but I think that will stick with land landings. Starship need to have landing legs anyway to land on the moon and Mars, so landing here on Earth it would be simpler to use those same legs and land on Earth on a pad and then be stacked back onto the booster. They can put a landing pad right next to the orbital launch site so that the cranes on top of the orbital launch towers can reach over, grab a landed starship and stack it back on a booster. And that still gives you a pretty rapid reuse capability. So I think that is the expectation right now. But plans are ever changing as they develop all this architecture. And a question here, why is the 8th tower segment smaller than the others? I think it's just how it ended up being easiest to construct the tower segments. There's a certain height that they need for the launch tower, and it didn't work out to an even number when dividing out all the sections. So I think the last section just doesn't need to be as tall to get to the height that they need. So just a matter of how easy it was to fabricate the different sections. They could have made each section slightly smaller and have them all been the same size, or they could have done it the way they did. And it just ended up being a little simpler to do it this way. Let's see, I'm still reading through some questions, and I'll keep pulling some out of here. We also have some super chats here. Mars or Bust, thanks for the support. And Luke with the membership, thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it. Java Man asking, is the high bay door wide enough to accommodate a 12-meter diameter Starship? SpaceX now has experience building 12-meter tanks. Do we know how wide that opening into the high bay in Boca Chica is?
Elon tweeted at one point, chat can tell me because I do not remember.
Chad, let us know. But Not sure. How wide are the high bay doors at the VAB? I think they're wide enough. Because a full shuttle stack was pretty wide, plus plus the crawler and stuff. So, in that event, that would work. But I don't know exactly what it is for the Boca Chica. I'll keep an eye on chat, see if chat knows. I apologize, I don't know the actual answer to that. And James with the kind words says, keep on keeping on, NSF team. Appreciate the kind words and the support there. Sean asking, how do you think the tanker starships will be able to transfer fuel without ullage thrusters? Will it use an expanding gas bladder to push the fuel to the pumps? I thought they were going to use thrusters to transfer the fuel. Was that not correct? Am I misremembering? I mean, they'll need ullage thrusters for sure to conduct in-orbit maneuvers, especially like lunar transfer burns and Mars transfer burns and things like that. I think that is the plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat, but 99% certain that that is actually the plan and that they're not even going to have pumps or anything like that. Jack in the back channel is telling me I'm correct. All right, so let's, well, at least one person telling me I'm not crazy, so.
And ever so slowly, the 7th section of the tower continues to translate towards the tower.
And that super heavy booster 3 also starting to peek out of the high bay. And yeah, we were pointing out that this tower section gets real close to the boom of the crane when they're lifting it. If I had to bet, I would bet that this crane's going to be lowered to horizontal and extended again before we get the last section to lift. I could be mistaken, but that's certainly what it looks like. Glenn asking if the Super Heavy booster will have a skirt like Starship, or will the engines be exposed like Falcon? I believe there will not be a skirt around the engine section. I believe it'll be somewhat exposed. In fact, I think to fit all the engines that they need, the engine bells, not like the power pack with all the plumbing and stuff, but the bells of the outer ring of engines might actually protrude out a little bit from the diameter of the vehicle to get them to fit. So I don't think there's going to be a skirt around them. The skirt on Starship is primarily so that they have a place to put the landing legs. They'll need those fueling connections and the staging connections to the Super Heavy booster. But obviously the Super Heavy booster doesn't have anything to connect to underneath other than the launch mount. So don't think there will be a skirt on Super Heavy.
The chat wondering if they can straighten the boom more to get space for the 8th segment. I'm not a crane expert. I don't know how vertical the crane is able to go while still being structurally stable.
Yeah, no, most of us have our expertise in space flight and not cranes. So, don't know exactly. So we're keeping an eye on it and we're learning a lot about cranes these days.
I mean, the top part does have to lean forward though, just to be able to get to clear the rest of the tower while still getting the segment is lifting over the top of the tower. So it can't be straight up, regardless
Right.
of if the crane is capable of handling that, which I don't think it can, but
Brian asking, are those ropes that you see that are white going from section 7 to the ground? Yep, those are the guidelines, the taglines. And I believe yeah, you can actually see on the right-hand side view, you can see them going from the tower section all the way down to the ground.
Yeah, if I had to place money, I'm putting money on a crane extension because
Yeah,
to me this looks like it is at its limit.
I agree.
Yeah, if you are a crane expert, and by expert I mean you work or ideally are a crane operator, please message us on Twitter.
That would be very helpful, yes. Uh, Titch or just saying, been watching for a few months now. Love this stuff now. Great work. Appreciate the kind words there. Really appreciate it.
And I am continuing to watch the booster, and right now it is not moving. It's just stationary where it has been in the high bay.
Gotcha. Thanks for watching that, Michael. William asking if they'll be testing the hot gas thrusters on Booster 3. That is what we did see hot gas thrusters installed on Booster 3, right?
Yes, but Elon said they're going to go back to the cold gas or booster 4.
Right. Um, doesn't mean that they won't take an opportunity to test some of the hot gas thrusters on Booster 3, maybe. Again, we don't know exactly what that ground testing will entail. It's possible, but we don't know for sure. Joe asking, do you guys plans to still have cameras in situ at Boca Chica and continue to cover flights way in the future when there are multiple launches per day? Y'all, as long as there are people who want to watch Boca Chica, we will have cameras in Boca Chica. Unless this somehow gets boring several years from now, I think the cameras in Boca Chica are staying a long time. And we're glad that you all come out to hang out and you're so interested in what's going on down there because it is interesting. This is next generation spaceflight under development, so we're glad you all enjoy the coverage. Let's see. Brandon asking, is Starship the first reusable second stage rocket? Not really. The space shuttle was technically stage and a half. I don't know if you count a shuttle orbiter as a second stage. If you do, then no. If you're not counting if you're making the distinction between the shuttle stage and a half design and a two-stage rocket, then I believe the answer is yes. There have been lower stage reuse, but there have not been upper stage reuse short of a shuttle orbiter. So if that's the distinction you're making, then I suppose the answer is yes. Adam asking, will there be refueling in Mars orbit, or is there enough fuel for Starship alone to escape Mars's gravity? I believe that Starship will be able to fully refuel on Mars and have enough Delta V to get from Mars' surface all the way back to Earth. I do not believe on-orbit refueling on Mars will be needed. That could change if a lot of payload wants to be brought from Mars back to Earth, if there's actually return payload. In that event, then the Delta V requirements could change, and thus you might want on-orbit refueling on Mars, which they could do. They could launch a Starship fully refueled from Mars' surface into Mars orbit, have residual fuel because you're not going all the way back to Earth or anything like that, and use that for on-orbit refueling in Mars orbit. That could be a thing, but we don't know if I don't know if that'll be a plan. I do believe a Starship can get itself all the way back to Earth without on-orbit refueling with minimal payload. A question is, isn't there a big risk with flying Starship 20 on Booster 4 without hopping the booster first, or will there be a hop? Again, the Super Heavy boosters don't have landing legs. You can't really do hop tests like that. They would have to install like a temporary landing leg to do hop tests, which yes, they could do in theory. But I don't know if that's really in the plans. I think if you look at Falcon 9 development, the first landing attempts simply came after conducting an orbital launch. You can conduct an experimental landing attempt um, without risking the success of the orbital mission. So I think that'll be their first landing attempts, kind of like how they did with Falcon 9. Yes, Falcon 9 also did hop tests. But they also did Starship, basically hop tests. And those gave them a lot of data that is directly applicable to Super Heavy. Obviously, there are some differences, but they can do ground static fire testing with the Super Heavy boosters, and I think that will be sufficient enough to be confident enough in an orbital stack attempt and making the first recovery attempts on those flights instead of a hop test with a Super Heavy booster. Plans can change, but that's certainly what it's seeming like they're going to go for. Pedro with the super chat, thank you so much for the support, and ZMMZ as well. Thank you also for the support. We appreciate it. Peter Davis says, do we know when the launch platform will be installed? Unfortunately, we do not. We don't know exactly how much work is needed before the sort of launch table or launch platform rolls out and is installed on the launch mount. Not sure how much work is remaining there, so we don't really have a estimate there. The question, how long can you keep methane and oxygen at cryogenic temperatures in orbit? That's a good question. However, there's ways to mitigate that. You can keep the tanks pressurized and by extension at a certain temperature needed to minimize boil off. Starship is of course designed to keep enough propellant the right temperature for landing on the moon and Mars. Part of that is using those header tanks, which are smaller and can be kept at those conditions a little easier than the main tanks. There are ways to mitigate that. There is also planned a variant of the Starship vehicle that will have insulated tanks, most likely as a propellant storage vehicle. That'll be part of the on-orbit refueling architecture. So there's some other ways that you can sacrifice payload performance for better insulated tanks. And if you have a vehicle, a Starship vehicle, whose job it is to maintain propellant, you can do that. So there are ways to keep those commodities at the right conditions for storage once you're on orbit. And Richard asking about bringing those cryogenic fuels out to Deimos and Phobos. What kind of ways could they accomplish that? They could need to transport them from land out to the sea launch platforms, but they could also produce that using the same technology they're going to use to produce them on the moon or at least Mars. And here on Earth at Boca Chica, they're planning to use basically chemical processes to extract oxygen from the atmosphere into liquid oxygen and extract CO2, carbon dioxide and hydrogen from the atmosphere to make methane. You can do that out on the ocean platforms too, from the atmosphere and from the water even. So that might even be easier than conducting, like transporting the commodities out to the launch platforms. In fact, that might even be more likely because, like you said, transporting those fuels out to the launch platform might be a pretty big logistical challenge. It might be easier to produce on site. Pedro with the super chat saying, thanks for the content, guys. Appreciate it. And the question is, how is the Raptor count on the site at the moment? Do we have enough for a booster flight? I don't think they have a full orbital launch attempt complement of Raptors yet. Well, we know we've only spotted one vacuum Raptor engine, so we know we'll need at least 3 of those for Starship. But as far as the Super Heavy booster goes, I don't know if we've seen enough booster Raptor engines yet. But we know they're working on it, and we've seen a lot of Raptor deliveries lately, so we're going to keep an eye on it, and we know the number of Raptors is growing. But we don't have a exact number. I do not believe they have enough for the first orbital stack yet. And a super chat here thought about having a crane company rep on NSF Live to ask crane questions. Listen, if you work for, and I don't know how to pronounce the name, which is why I skipped over. Michael, do you know how to pronounce the name of the crane company?
I think it's Liber. I'm not
Liber?
German,
Okay.
so
Yeah, I'm not.
I'm
I'm
probably
not
butchering
either. But
it, but it starts with
if
an
you
L and ends with an R.
if you work with that company and you want to
Maybe it's
come on and
Liber.
talk about cranes,
Yeah, Liber.
Liber
Okay,
maybe.
or Liber. I
Liber or
don't.
Liber. If you work with that company that's on screen right now, and you want to come on and talk about cranes, you are you have a standing invitation to NSF Live. Reach out to us on Twitter, and we'll hook something up for sure. That would definitely be a worthwhile segment.
Chat now debating how to pronounce it, and I can say there's multiple answers in chat, so I don't know which one is right. Some say leap hair, some say leap hair, some say Lieber. I thought it was Liber myself. I could be wrong.
No, Raven with the big super chat, appreciate it. If the bells from the outside Raptors protrude outside the sides of the booster, how will it be secured to the orbital launch tower? Or is that supposed to be orbital? Remember, it doesn't really get secured to the tower. We get secured to the launch mount, which will have a table on top. So I don't know if that's what you mean. I don't know how it's. We haven't seen them install the engines yet, so we don't know exactly what that engine section will look like. It might be very slight, and thus it still fits in the launch tower, or in the launch mount. Excuse me. Um, Obviously, we'll have to some way. Um, don't know exactly how that interface will look like. We're gonna wait and see how the engines are installed, how exactly that engine section looks, and how the launch mount itself looks, because again, they're still working on that too. And that'll provide some clarity as to how exactly that will look.
In chat, the consensus seems to be that it is Lieber, which I think is what I said the first time. So
Okay.
I guess just don't second guess yourself is the lesson learned there. But that segment is nearly there. It's definitely a lot tighter than the previous lifts. Certainly seems like the crane is at its maximum lifting height right now. And I'm looking at my other monitor for the booster status, and I can tell you, I'll show it quickly, it has not moved any further, but if you
Mhm.
see it, if I see it moving, I will obviously switch over again.
And a question on that front, Charles asking, will Booster 3 be transferred to the launch pad vertically like Starship or on the side? It will go out vertically just like it is right now. Both the starships and the boosters roll out vertically, are stacked onto the launch mount vertically. They're never transferred horizontally. James asking, what would happen if one of the forward flaps failed to extend for the flip? Would the engines be able to correct? Well, if the forward flaps don't extend, you can keep like it all. If you fold the aft flaps all the way in as well, I don't know. It might result in less drag, but I think you can still keep the vehicle horizontal in the belly flop by just folding the aft flaps way in as well. I could be mistaken there. But if the forward flaps don't extend, that just means you don't have drag at the nose of the vehicle. So to compensate, you need less drag at the aft of the vehicle to keep it in the horizontal orientation. That will mean descending at a much higher speed, which would mean you need more fuel for the engine. So it's just a matter of how much landing fuel margin you have. Do you have enough that you can conduct a landing burn from a higher terminal velocity? The whole point of the belly flop maneuver is to reduce the fuel you need, so I would guess that would be a landing failure. Um, but again, that's a one-off contingency scenario that hopefully doesn't come up. I don't know what kind of contingencies they may have in the event that the flaps fail to actuate. A question about that first orbital test flight, since the Super Heavy will be conducting some sort of water landing, will the Raptors be recovered somehow or allowed to sink? I don't know if there's any reasonable way to get those Raptors back. I mean, we've seen Falcon 9s that have come down in the water and get kind of towed back into Port Canaveral. I don't know if they salvaged any Merlin parts from those, and I think the same will probably be of Raptors. I think they're sacrificing those Raptors for the good of the orbital launch test. Unfortunately, maybe I'm mistaken, but something tells me that once those Raptors hit the ocean, they're going to be done. And Lindsay saying, thank you to the NASA spaceflight crew for all you guys do. Thank you so much. I mean, can't thank the production crew enough, can't thank Mary enough for all the work that they do out in Boca Chica. It's really a big team effort, and we're glad you guys appreciate it and enjoy the coverage. A couple new memberships here, Ed and Hector, thank you so much. And again, it's that kind of support that allows us to do what we do, so we really appreciate it. Neil in chat says, as a chat representative of Switzerland, I can vouch for the pronunciation being Lieb here. Lieb here, I believe is how you're saying to pronounce that. Appreciate the input there, Neil. We're looking to verify that. Appreciate it. You would think after all this time we would have learned to pronounce the crane company, but I don't think we ever got an official answer, so appreciate the help there. Lieb here. Izzy saying, asking, will the sea launch platforms be free floating or be secured to the seafloor for launching and catching rockets? I don't know exactly how those rigs work. Are they anchored once they reach out to the middle of the ocean? I guess
I don't. I mean, they're floating
they're oil. They're
platforms,
designed as oil rigs, so they have to
they
interface
definitely,
with the seafloor.
I don't think they anchor, at least the type that SpaceX bought. They have large thrusters like you see on the drone ship that do station keeping, I believe.
Right. Okay, so probably free floating in that case, and kind of like how the drone ships operate, they'll have thrusters that station keep. That makes more sense. Thanks. And we got another super chat for Jane saying it is in fact a leap hair. So I'm getting conflicting answers from chat. Appreciate the support, guys.
This reminds me, I did actually try to get this right once. I looked it up online and I got different answers.
Yeah, so.
I think I should probably just like watch some marketing videos from the company and maybe they use their name in it.
Right, yeah. I question, will there be an interstage or is that what Starship Skirt is for? There will kind of be an interstage. Normally, the interstage is where the upper stage engines sit into the lower stage. However, like you said, Starship has a skirt, so the engines don't really come out of the upper stage. But there will still be a forward dome at the top tank of Super Heavy, and thus the outer sort of cylinder will go up to cover that dome. So that's kind of an interstage. There will also likely be load-bearing structures on that part of the booster as part of the stage separation mechanism. So kind of, but it won't be the same as like a Falcon 9 interstage. It'll look a little different. And a question about how SpaceX could static fire the Super Heavy booster. Could they fire all the engines at once, certain numbers of engines at once? Yeah, we were talking about that earlier. Since they're over at the Suborbital launch site, those test stands are likely not rated to support 29 engines at once. So it's possible that they'll do clusters of engines at once to test them all, or something like that. But we don't know the exact plans.
Very courteous of SpaceX to do the lift first and then the roll out, because if they were happening at the same time, I would be struggling to give. I mean, I think people would be. You'd have half the chat asking me to put more Super Heavy on the screen. You'd have half the chat asking for the tower section. So one after the other is much preferred.
Shout out to SpaceX. I'm going to keep looking for some questions here. Do we have any news with respect to the catch system? How will it catch the booster? We have not seen anything definitive about how exactly that system will work. We're definitely keeping an eye on it because I think that's something we're all very interested in, but don't have any visual of anything that's confirmed to be part of that system yet. So we don't know for sure. And another question asking, what would be the point of a hypersonic flight, referring to Starship SN16? Elon mentioning that that is a possibility. The aerodynamics of a vehicle change drastically once you go supersonic, and no Starship vehicle has done that yet. Hypersonic is generally defined as Mach 5 or higher, whereas supersonic is obviously just greater than Mach 1. So 1 times the speed of sound versus 5 times the speed of sound. When you go to higher and higher Mach numbers, the aerodynamics change a bit more. And you also start to experience some heating. So it's a way to kind of start testing the heat shield. However, it's still nowhere near the speeds that they'll reach for an orbital re-entry or anything like that. So I'm not sure if that would really be the point. I think the point would be to test the aerodynamics of Starship on ascent at hypersonic speeds, and then on the way down in the belly flop coming down from hypersonic speeds. It wouldn't really be a re-entry heating test because you really wouldn't get anywhere close to the heating you have during an orbital re-entry. You can still test the heat shield tiles that they'll, remain fixed properly and stuff like that, but it wouldn't really be a heating test. Hector with a new membership, appreciate the support. And Ludo with a super chat as well, appreciate it. And Sir as well, thank you all so much for all the support. We really do appreciate it.
Look at that. The 7th segment is now pretty much directly on top of the tower. And that gives you a good idea of approximately how tall it's going to look once this section is lowered, because it doesn't have very far to go to be on top. So that's going to be quite impressive. And of course, about another 2/3 of a segment is still to come with a slightly smaller segment 8.
I believe we talked on a previous stream, this is now taller than the launch tower at Launch Complex 39A. So for some size comparison there. Don't know if anyone's so inclined, a Photoshop of the orbital launch site compared to 39A would be pretty cool. Although of course we might get that in real life once they build the Starship launch mount at 39A, but And Richard say that his dog just chewed up his headphones while he was getting a beer. Thanks for the coverage. Appreciate it. Sorry about your headphones. Glad you tuned in, and we're glad that we appreciate the support. Is it a possibility that Super Heavy will never even start all its engines on the ground level, but after liftoff? Air lighting the booster engines would probably be not a great idea. You generally speaking want to check the health of all of your engines on the ground prior to releasing it from the launch mount. So more than likely, um, that will not be it won't be an air light scenario. Chad asking, after the tower is completed, will they keep this crane around or not? I think until the crane is whatever crane they're going to install on the launch tower is actually ready, they'll keep this crane around. But once they have the crane at the launch tower, that will probably replace the crane that they're currently leasing. Johnny asking, will it be taller than the SLS tower? Ooh, that's a good question. Can someone look up how tall the mobile launcher for SLS is? That's a good question. It's probably close. We'll get back to you on that, Johnny. Appreciate the support. We will get back to you on that question.
370 feet tall. So
Is the mobile launcher?
yeah, so Starship's tower is significantly higher. It's
All right, it was.
469 feet tall for the Starship tower.
So there you go. Thank you, Michael. Question asking, how long do you think it will take to roll out Super Heavy? How long do these rollouts usually take, Michael?
The rollouts?
Yeah.
Good question. We've never seen a super heavy rollout, so anyone's guess how long it's going to take. For a Starship, it's about 90 minutes to 2 hours probably, but the road closure is from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. for the super heavy rollout, and it is not an intermittent closure like we normally see for rollout. It is a hard closure, so I'm not sure if the super heavy. I think it's likely the super heavy boost is going to take longer, but I'm not sure exactly how long.
Gotcha. Question, are the Raptor engines already installed on Super Heavy? I do not believe there are any Raptors on Booster 3, no. Got a great view here from Mary.
Oh, you jinxed it.
Yeah, right as I said
Signal
that.
says, the signal says I'm going to hiccup right now.
I'll get that back.
Yeah, the AT&T network today is all over the place, but that's why we have modems on both Verizon and AT&T. There we go, it's back.
There you go. There's that great view from Mary, and you can see the people helping the workers guide this section into place. And again, we are also keeping an eye on Booster 3, which looks like it will roll out shortly. And once that starts happening, we will be showing that as well. But right now, they are finishing the lift of another section of the orbital launch tower. This is at the orbital launch site in Boca Chica, where initial orbital flights for the Starship and Super Heavy system will take place. And getting this ground infrastructure in place is the big ticket item to getting ready for that first test flight. Hector with the message saying, "You guys rock." I'm assuming that what the emojis mean. Appreciate the support there, Hector, and the kind words. Lensman asking, can SpaceX be certain that the super heavy height will never need to be extended? It only just fits in the high bay as is. I think that if the if they need a bigger high bay, they will simply build a bigger high bay for future iterations. But right now, they've got the facilities they need for the current version. If they need to make bigger vehicles, they'll have to build bigger construction facilities. Jarg asking, will there be a test payload for the first orbital flight? Not sure. Don't know if they'll risk any sort of payload for the first orbital flight, even if it's even an internal payload like a Starlink or something. They could put something like they did on Falcon Heavy demo. They could put a Tesla Roadster or a Cybertruck or something. I don't know, but I haven't heard any word to that, and probably not anything operational. Blake asking, could they have done a 29 engine static fire at McGregor first? I don't know if they have the facilities in McGregor to conduct a 29 engine static fire. I think the only way you're really going to be able to do that is using the orbital launch mat that's in Boca Chica, so. Ben asking, will Starship have a maximum landing payload or will it be the same or less than launch payload? I don't, off the top of my head, I mean, there will be some maximum return payload that Starship can launch. Off the top of my head, I do not remember what it is. Yeah, I'm not sure what the number would be. It will probably be a little bit less than launch payload, but I don't have I don't have a number off the top of my head, so I don't want to make any false claims there. But there will be some maximum, yes. You please explain the purpose of the launch tower as opposed to the launch table? Sure. So the launch tower is what we're seeing stacking right now, and it will give them access to eventually a crew access arm. There will be a crane on top used for stacking operations. There'll be a lightning tower on top for lightning protection. There will be the catch arms that are used to catch a landing super heavy booster. So those are the main purposes of this tower. The launch table is is part of the launch mount, and it will be where the vehicle actually sits on, and that will hold the weight of the full stack when it sits at the launch pad. So do two different parts of the orbital launch site. And again, seeing a lot of messages in chat. No, there are no Raptor engines installed on Super Heavy yet. Booster 3 does not have any engines installed. Question, could they stack Starship using Franken crane? I believe if the crane on the launch tower won't be ready in time, Franken crane, the big crane they're using to stack these launch segments, could also be used to stack a Starship on top of Super Heavy. Probably, yes. And another super chat here from Lensman saying, been watching the channel for over a year every day. Thanks for keeping me sane. Superb work. Superb work. Thank you for the support there, and we're glad you're enjoying the coverage, and we appreciate your support. And Basic Bill saying possible topping tree on the last tower segment. Well, the lightning tower maybe, that kind of counts. But appreciate the support there. Question, will the launch tower include an elevator? Yes, in fact, I don't know. It's kind of in the middle of the tower, so I don't know if you can see it from this angle. There is an elevator at the launch tower, so that'll give you access to the crane up top. It'll give them access to a crew access tower at some point, stuff like that. A question about what is happening in the mid bay as of now. Haven't heard a lot about it recently. Is there anything going on in the mid bay right now?
Yes, they're stacking the additional GSE tanks for the orbital pad.
Ah, that's where the GSC tanks are being worked on. Got it. Thanks, Michael. Tim asks, will your cameras survive 28 Raptors going off at one time? To be determined, Tim. We'll let you know. um, Another question, will the hot gas thrusters be used on the Starship 20 flight? Elon has said that they're going to go with cold gas thrusters for the near term. That first orbital flight will likely not have hot gas thrusters. They'll get there eventually, but not for the first flight. Cassiano says, hey, thank you for providing us with the excellent broadcast. Keep up the great work. Best regards from Brazil. Thank you so much for tuning in from Brazil. We appreciate your support, and we're glad you enjoy. Kevin asking, where is Ship 20 at the build site right now? I believe Ship 20 is still pretty much in pieces. There's components to it sitting around at the production site, but I don't think any of them have been stacked or assembled with one another yet. Of course, when that starts, that'll be a big milestone to keep an eye out for. And Demigod says they need to have a Starship marathon with people trying to go up the stairs on the orbital launch tower. Sounds like a good idea to me. Appreciate the support. And Kyle says, listening at work, thanks for the good work. Appreciate the support there, Kyle. And Ted, thank you for the funny super chat there. Itar has something to say about sharing design of the Raptor engine. Appreciate the support. And Fendus Nye with a $100 Canadian dollar super chat. Thank you so much for the very generous support. No message or anything, just saying thanks. So appreciate the support there. We really do appreciate the generosity, and we're glad that you enjoy the coverage. And with your support, we get to keep doing what we're doing. So thank you so much.
Looks like the tower is stacked.
And on that note, it does look like the tower is indeed stacked. So we are 7 of 8 sections done at the orbital launch site.
That is what the tower looks like now. Pretty cool.
Once that final section and the lightning tower and the crane get stacked, and once the scaffolding gets removed, I think that tower is gonna look even cooler, but it's already getting some pretty big spaceport vibes from the orbital launch site. It's very cool. I believe that super heavy booster is still staying put for now, right, Michael?
Yes, I will bring that up, but no movement yet. We are expecting that sometime today, though, although, of course, I'm sure there's weather conditions with a lift that big. They probably don't want too much wind. It is an empty tin can, essentially, so uh, depending on how the weather goes, there are also some scattered thunderstorms in the area. At least that was the latest forecast that I saw. So we'll see if it actually happens, but it could happen as early as today. And we did see it start to move out of the high bay earlier, so that's why we are currently thinking it's going to happen imminently, but we don't know for sure.
Some questions here asking what is the difference between a hot gas thruster and a cold gas thruster? So a cold gas thruster just uses compressed air, basically, usually nitrogen. Sorry, compressed gas, I should say. It's not actually air. Um, to provide some thrust with the thrusters. A hot gas thruster actually combusts fuel. So you take a little bit of methane and a little bit of liquid oxygen and combust it for a very small thrust. It is a little bit higher thrust than the cold gas thrusters and a little more efficient as far as specific impulse goes. So they're a little bit better on those fronts, but they are a little more complicated. So um, that is the difference between the two. And Robert asking what the advantages of them, like I just said, better efficiency, a little bit better thrust, so better control authority, but at the cost of a little bit of complexity. So that's why they're going to start with the cold gas thrusters and improve the hot gas thrusters later on, likely. And a super chat question asking if Section 8 will really fit with this crane. I believe our consensus right now is that they're going to need to extend the crane. There is one more configuration for this crane that reaches a little higher, and I bet that will need to be used for the final section. So that could also mean that we'll have a little bit of downtime between this section lift and the next one while they reconfigure the crane. And Jonathan says, petition to call the hot gas thrusters pigeon engines as there aren't any smaller birds of prey than the Falcons. That's a good point. Maybe they'll have to find a bird of prey to name their thrusters after. Although they named the thrusters on Dragon Dracos. Not actually a bird of prey. I don't think a dragon counts as a bird of prey, at least. I don't know. Um, maybe they'll have some other naming scheme for them, but appreciate the super chat there. Um, a question here asking, well, first of all, saying appreciate the coverage, so thank you very much. And says, any ideas if the tower will have some sort of shield to protect the elevator before launch? I would bet that they will do similar to what they did at 39A and provide some cladding around the outside of the tower. It won't just be an open truss structure. Would not be surprised if they do something like that to help protect what's inside the tower. I don't know if we have any official word on those plans yet. Ryan asking have there been any mention of the load capacity of the orbital launch tower? Um, don't think so. However, I mean, we know its purpose is at least partly to stack an empty super heavy booster and an empty Starship on top. Because obviously they won't be fueled when they're stacking. So that gives you a lower bound. It'll have to be at least that. Um, don't have any numbers or anything like that though. Um, Lord Maximus with the super chat saying, "Do you think SpaceX could make a super heavy booster, super heavy booster?" basically a bigger super heavy booster for increased performance. Basically, I think they're gonna keep the super heavy sized as is. Don't think they need to upgrade the booster size. Because once you get Starship into orbit again, most of its capability comes from on-orbit refueling. So you start with effectively, you start over with a full tank of gas and Starship in orbit. So increasing the booster size doesn't actually help that much. Also, now that Starship stack or oh geez, not Starship stacking. Now that the orbital launch tower stacking is complete, I know Mary is going to shut down her feed from now, save some battery life, and we're going to fall over to the booster or the robotic cameras. Big thank you to Mary for being out there this morning, providing her excellent camera views as always. Really quick, a couple more super chats. Dougal says, "Happy Canada Day, my fellow Canadians. Do you have any July 4th plans?" Oh, I'm sure we do. Gotta celebrate some Independence Day here in the States. But I appreciate the support there, Dougal, and of course, Happy Canada Day to any of our Canadian viewers. Matthias saying, "Can you also stream or publish your videos on Twitch?" Every once in a while, we simulcast over on DAS's Twitch channel at Kerbal Space Academy. I don't know if we're doing that right now. Michael, are we also on
When
Twitch right
DOS
now?
is on,
Or
we're
no?
on Twitch. When DOS is not here,
DAS
we're
is on,
not.
we're also on Twitch.
Because it's his
Gotcha.
personal channel.
Yeah. DAS's Twitch channel, sometimes we make a cameo over there. But NASA Spaceflight is over here on YouTube. And Johan saying, "Thank you so much from Sweden. Appreciate the super chat support there. Thank you so much." And one last super chat here, asking, looks like the launch mount is relatively far away from the tower. I remember they need some clearance for, access towers and the catch arms and stuff like that, but they are pretty much next to each other, and they were designed they were placed so that the crane can access the launch mount. So they're not so far away that it'll be an issue. They were designed as such. But that clears out the super chat queue here, and now that stacking is complete, we can see that super heavy booster is kind of stationary right now. We are going to obviously keep an eye on it, pending weather and other conditions. That rollout is potentially as early as today. But since they're not happening right now, and since stacking is complete, I think we're going to go ahead and spool down this broadcast. We will, of course, be keeping an eye on Booster 3, and should rollout begin to occur, we will spool up a separate broadcast for that. Just because we don't have any guarantee that this is going to happen today, especially with the weather. It could get pushed till tomorrow, could happen several hours from now. So all of those things considered, we're going to go ahead and spool down this broadcast. Stay tuned to the NASA Spaceflight channel if you want to be notified when we go live again for this rollout or for anything else for that matter. Go ahead, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and you will be notified when we go live. Otherwise, they have completed stacking of that 7th section of the tower. So for our early morning coverage from Boca Chica, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you all so much for watching. Big thank you to Mary for being out there in the field as always, bringing us the up close and personal camera views, in addition to our robotic camera views. But glad to have Mary back in Boca Chica and covering these events as usual. Also, a big thank you to Chris Bergen, managing editor of NASA Spaceflight, who was on commentary earlier today, offering some insight. And then, of course, myself, Thomas Burkhardt, joining commentary later on. Happy to join the stream today. Also want to give a big thank you to, in the background, Jack Beyer, helping us out with some questions and stuff.
Oh, you got me.
Oh no, did you click you first?
Yeah. There we go. I fixed it.
Michael has to anticipate whose name I'm going to say next. Big thank you to Jack, and then, of course, a big thank you to Michael Baylor, handling the production levers and knobs in the background. Thank you so much for everything you do, Michael, and thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thank you all for watching.
All right, see you guys.
Propulsion continues to be normal.
Our EPA chamber pressure looks good. Toggling up.
Roger, roll, Lieutenant.
Water towers can fly! Yes!
Tango Delta nominal.
Flight down, feet off. Bring in, feet off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Concur. We don't need any more of these.